the Toffees to the Tractor Boys, the Eagles to the Seagulls, Gunners, Bees, Hammers and Magpies, Premier League teams have got a load of crazy nicknames. Ever wondered where they came from? Let's start with Everton. They're dubbed the Toffees, but why? Well, because when the club was formed, just down the road there were two local toffee shops. Ye Ancient Everton Toffee House and Mother Noblet's Toffee Shop were big fan favourites. Next, they say if you can't beat 'em, join 'em, and that's exactly what Ipswich Town did when it came to their nickname. The term Tractor Boys used to be chanted by their opponents as a way of putting the team down for their farming background. But during one game back in the late 90s, Ipswich were 1-0 up and they decided to flip the script. 1-0 to the Tractor Boys, they sang, and a new nickname was born. Let's head to Leicester, famous for more than just a red, well, orangey cheese and Jamie Vardy. Leicestershire is also the birthplace of fox hunting, hence the Foxes. Next up, turns out apples are not the only fruit that don't fall far from the tree. Bournemouth's nickname, the Cherries, comes from the fact the club's stadium was originally built right next to a bunch of cherry orchards. This next story actually involves two club nicknames. It started with Crystal Palace. They were having an absolute nightmare run back in the early 70s. They'd been relegated after a terrible spell and manager Malcolm Allison decided enough was enough. He wanted a new nickname, something strong, fast and destined for success. Something exactly like an eagle. But there's more to this one. Brighton were in search of a nickname too, and Palace finally gave them what they needed. In a heated match between the two back in 1976, Palace fans began chanting, "Eagles, Eagles." And some clever Brighton fans came up with the perfect reply, "Seagulls, Seagulls." Not all club nicknames have a crazy story though. Take the Gunners. That just comes from the fact a group of munitions workers in the Royal Arsenal factory in Woolwich set up the club in 1886. On the flip side, some nicknames seem simple, but there's a bit more to them, like West Ham. The Hammers is actually nothing to do with the ham part of the name. It comes from the fact the club used to be called Thames Ironworks FC and was made up of workmen.
They're more than happy to keep playing for the sheer thrill, joy and prestige of the Ryder Cup.
Yeah, good evening and welcome to your weekly injection of news from around the world of football, particularly in Europe. I'm Danny Kelly. With me here on Trans Europe Express for the next 3 hours. I'm delighted to say Andy Brassell is very much on the train as well. Lots to get through in that time. Huge stories from the world of transfers, mostly involving strikers coming to England or leaving England. We'll bring you all the latest from Germany, and Neil Candola will join us later on with more transfer news. Bob Bubka has passed away, and I'll be paying tribute to Bob in about an hour's time here on talkSPORT, one of my absolute broadcast heroes. We'll have Mbappe watch and all the usual bits and pieces, including the latest from the Women's Euros, where you've heard that racism story is now making the headlines. All of that coming up on talkSPORT in the next 3 hours. Welcome one, welcome all to Trans Europe Express.
Express. Express. Express.
Good evening, Andy.
Good evening, Danny. How are you?
Really, really good. As I say, we have enjoyed the voice of Bob Bubka on this station, particularly on this programme over the last 10 years that we've been doing it. Because, of course, the American golf tournaments used to end or do end during Trans-Europe Express, and Bob would bring us the climax to those amazing sporting events. And the news this morning that the great man had passed away, it really hit me actually, because I always thought it was great fun to be with. We'll pay a little bit more tribute to him later on, about 11 o'clock. Let's start then, Andy, with the story surrounding two big strikers, Ugo Ekitike, and poor old Gyökeres, who seems to have been on the block for the past 2 months. Where do you want to start with this?
I think we have to start with Ugo Ekitike because it's a story that's been bigger and bigger in recent days, Danny. Of course, Newcastle, who've had a long-standing interest in him since he was at Reims as a youngster, and since he first emerged into our top 5 leagues consciousness with a series of great performances and big goals for them before deciding not to go to St James's Park and be one of Eddie Howe's first signings, and he chose to go to PSG instead, which turned out to be not a great move. I think it's fair to say, has built himself into something pretty special at Eintracht Frankfurt. Now, the initial messages we were hearing out of Newcastle this week is not only were they making an offer for him, but they hope to pair him with Alexander Isak. Now, of course, wow. Alexander Isak of
Line's gone down, I think.
A lot of other people, including, well, not limited to, but including Arsenal as well. Only a few select clubs could afford to make a proper pop for Isak. But you had to ask, was it going to be, if Newcastle were going to get Ekitike, was it going to be a gradual handover with Isak at the longest, really? Would they be able to not only create a system which integrated the two of them, but would it have been desirable for them to do so? Was this then future-proofing them for maybe next year when Isak's only got 2 years on his contract and selling him then? Well, we know what's happened since. Liverpool have come in and decided that Ekitike is very much their cup of tea, with Isak being far too costly a deal, really, to make happen. So you've got one slightly ruffled striker in the northeast of England, and one in Germany who won't be there much longer. He's very much looking forward to joining Liverpool.
And Andy, we'll get on to Gyökeres a little later, but the thing that really strikes me about this, you and I are very used to saying, oh, the Portuguese clubs, they've done it again, where they take players for 10, 15 million euros and turn them into 50, 60, 70 million pound Premier League players. Well, Eintracht Frankfurt have now followed this model in a way that's probably making RB Leipzig even blanch. I'm guessing we're having a little bit of trouble with Andy. The point I'm making there is that Eintracht Frankfurt are quite apart from what they're doing on the pitch, are also turning out players that are really super valuable again and again and again. And if you told me that Ekitike, even when he was playing against Spurs in the middle rounds, the knockout rounds of the Europa League, where he scored a wonderful goal in North London, but then was largely marked out the game, particularly in the second leg, was going to be worth 50, 60, 70 million euros, pounds even, I'd have been very, very, very surprised. But there you are, Eintracht Frankfurt continuing to do it. The other deal we were going to talk about here, myself and Andy, is that involving Gyökeres. We talked about it for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks now, how he is on the verge, on the cusp, on the lip of joining Arsenal. First and foremost, it appears to be the most obvious transfer in history, because experts greater at the game than me seem to think that Gyökeres fills their striker hole very, very easily, though I worry that Mikel Arteta is not sure he wants an out-and-out striker, because he enjoyed success as assistant coach of Manchester City with a false 9. But now, Andy, I think you're back with us. The complication is that Manchester United have suddenly said, why don't you come and join us, Victor? Okay, Andy Brassell still can't hear. Oh, good. Okay. Good. My point being that you're telling me that Manchester United now are prepared to match sort of the fee and wages that Arsenal are prepared to offer Victor Gyökeres.
Well, the reports coming out of Portugal, Danny, is that Manchester United have made an offer that's been accepted by Sporting. Now, Gyökeres' position as far as I'm aware, is that it's Arsenal or nothing. That's what he's dug his heels in about in recent weeks. And he's continued to prepare to continue to do that, despite the fact that obviously he's got this great pre-existing relationship with Ruben Amorim, that he would, I think, if we go back a year, have definitely liked to go to Manchester United. Things have changed since, not least because United aren't involved in European football, and there appears to be no quick route back to the Champions League for them. He's just turned 27, of course, so how far he is prepared to wait for them to reach that sort of level again is a big question as well. It feels to me like United are being a bit used to give Arsenal the hurry up. That's what it feels like to me, because, of course, this deal was pretty close in the first place between Arsenal and Sporting. It felt like a number of days ago that Arsenal and Sporting had got themselves in the spot where they were ready to make some sort of compromise. Of course, Gyökeres and his agent thought they got it done by waiving their right to 10% of the transfer fee. So they thought they were in there, and it still hasn't happened. So presumably, this is the latest bit of pressure being applied from the Sporting side to finally get this over the line. I would still be surprised if Victor Gyökeres didn't end up an Arsenal player. The other thing that's interesting to me, though, Danny, is that we're talking about these two deals. And look, I think Ekitike will work out well for Liverpool. I think if we're talking about him in the same circle as Isak, of course, there's everything about Ekitike, ever since he was at Reims, that suggested that he should be a massive hit for pretty much any team in any league, but certainly a Premier League team. You look at his confidence in leading the line, his strength, his speed, all of that sort of stuff. But he is probably at the point of his development that Isak was when he arrived at Newcastle. He's not the equal of Isak yet. And I think that both Liverpool and Newcastle know that. But it's interesting to me that clubs now, as we've said this so many times in recent months, would rather pay for the potential than they would pay for the finished article, even the biggest clubs.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying about perhaps Manchester United being used for the hurry-up for Victor Gyökeres. But it is also fair to say that Manchester United have a real need for that player, unless you have more faith in Rasmus Højlund than I have.
Yeah, but it's about getting him to come. If he doesn't want to come, it doesn't make any difference, does it, Danny? I mean, look, I think the interesting thing in terms of Manchester United, and depending on how much they've got in the pot, depending on how quickly and how lucratively they are able to shift Sancho, to shift Rashford, to shift the other players that they want to let go. And we really don't know how much is in the pot for United at the moment, because, of course, they're spending hugely already on Mbeumo and Cunha. One that I wonder what might come back into the picture is Benjamin Šeško, because remember that Manchester United were interested in him before he went to RB Leipzig in the first place. Of course, that Salzburg to Leipzig transfer, I know we've talked a lot about multi-club ownership in recent weeks. That's still a pretty easy move to make, and we've seen a lot of players continue to make that despite the very conscious owner divorce between those two teams to allow them both to compete in UEFA club competition. So we know that Arsenal have moved on to a different target. We know that part of the reason for that is that Šeško is expensive, which maybe could make him preventatively expensive for Manchester United. But if his name didn't come up in connection with a few Premier League clubs towards the back end of this window, I would be a little bit surprised.
Andy, let me ask you a question that'll probably get us both sacked. Is it, if you're Gyökeres, is it just obvious to choose Arsenal over Manchester United these days? Because one of the teams is very likely to be in the race for the Premier League and reaches the latter stage of the Champions League, and the other doesn't.
It is and it isn't. Look, I think United are still United, even if they weren't able to get the Europa League over the line, even if it was an incredibly disappointing Premier League season last season, and the season before that, and the season before that, if we're being completely honest, or, well, maybe leave out the season before that, the first Ten Hag season that got them back in the Champions League. But it's been it's been a lot of diminishing returns, you're right. But I think if you ask players globally, Manchester United is still a big thing. If you look at Brian Mbeumo and his choice to go there, if you look at Cunha and his choice to go there, United will remain a globally massive club. not only to English players, very importantly to overseas players. And I think if you look at Gyökeres and the fact that he would have accepted United if we go back, well, maybe even less than a year, until they're in the situation that they're currently in, I think that really is the issue. You don't really know what the investment is going to be. You look at the Ratcliffes and Ineos, and it's all about, a lot of it has been about cutting corners up until this point. Now, we don't know if this is indicative of a departure, these two new signings, or whether they're going to go back to more of the same, and it's going to be more sort of cutting out minimal savings here, there and everywhere. We just don't know. I think if you're Gyökeres, and we've talked about players maybe not commanding the same value when we look at Gyökeres, when we look at Osimhen, you know, players in their prime who should command absolute top value, and Premier League clubs not really going for them in the same way. Look at it from Gyökeres' perspective. As we said, 27, how long has he got for it to work? This is his prime. It has to be now or never. Arsenal are the safer bet. He is a safe bet for Arsenal, and they are a safe bet for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you very much indeed, Andy. When we come back in a few seconds' time, we'll be bringing you all the latest from Spain, including a Lamine Yamal celebration that was rather low-key, perhaps in a reaction to Partygate from the other day. And I don't mean to denigrate what was going on as a serious issue that had to be discussed. We'll talk about it next here on Trans-Europe Express. Welcome back to Trans-Europe Express this Sunday evening with me, Danny Kelly, and him, Andy Brassell. I don't want to overplay this, but it was a brilliant day of sport. The Tour de France stage was absolutely fascinating. The golf confirmed Scheffler as the leading player in the world just now. Much else besides, and all of it though overshadowed for me on a personal level by the news that I received this morning that Bob Bubka, who I've been a colleague with for 20 years, has, to use a useless old phrase, has signed his final scorecard. And I will be paying a little bit longer tribute, and we'll hear what Rupert Bell, his great colleague, had to say about him as well. That'll be at 10 o'clock here on Trans-Europe Express. I don't mean to be facile when I say that, of course, the show must go on, and Bob would have wanted that. He was a consummate sports professional and a brilliant broadcaster and a good guy. And while no doubt he would have wanted us to dab our eyes with a handkerchief handkerchief, in his case, a very flash silken handkerchief. He would also want the show to which he was so devoted to continue. So, Andy, let's move our attention then to Spain, where our headline is Lamine, the legend. And again, it's all the activity is around Barcelona, with the news that once again they are in for Marcus Rashford, a player that I, like so many in the past 3 years, I believe that they genuinely desire, but genuinely can't afford.
Yeah, that's right. It would seem that way, or it would have seemed that way for a lot of the summer and a lot of the last year, when we know it's a long-standing interest in Marcus Rashford for Manchester United, for Barcelona. But something's happened because it needed to happen, because Barcelona, after Nico Williams didn't happen, needed to get a player of profile and an attacking player of profile. Deco always said, as we've said for months, that his priority, rather than defensive reinforcements or goalkeepers or anyone else, of course they've got Joan Garcia over the line, was to go and get themselves an attacker to take some of the burden off Lewandowski, off Rafinha and off Lamine Yamal. They look to have got that. And Rashford is someone who can play both positions, unlike Nico Williams. Now, of course, he's taking a pay cut to make this happen. There's still no guarantee, certainly if you believe Javier Tebas, the president of La Liga, that Barcelona will be able to register him for the moment. Now, that is something that we have to keep an eye on, as with every Barcelona signing. That was what made Nico Williams back out of the deal. Now, Rashford, on one hand, doesn't have an enormous amount of options, partly because of his salary, partly because of a disappointing last couple of years. Even if he did show bits of him his old self at Aston Villa, it's fair to say. So, look, both sides needed this to happen quite badly. He's just arrived in Barcelona at the moment, actually. He's taken a private jet over there and he's arrived at Barcelona in the last hour.
Oh, has he indeed?
So everything's ready for him to do his medical in the morning and sign presumably tomorrow, with an announcement and presentation either late tomorrow or on Tuesday morning. So is actually happening, which I think is great news for Marcus Rashford. Yeah. It's great news for England. And if it all works, it's good news for Barcelona as well. Of course, they've got a time before the start of the league season. The league season doesn't start till over a month in Spain. So they've got a few moments to sort of shift a few bits financially. Now, they'll say it's fine. They'll have told him it's fine. That doesn't mean it will be fine. So, you know, we need to make sure
Nico Williams wasn't sure it was going to be fine, was he? Let's be truthful.
No, and remember, Dani Olmo got deregistered twice last season, so one to keep an eye on.
Andy, I just want to say about Marcus Rashford, because of the work he did socially, particularly around the kids' meals, people like me, who are not Manchester United fans, for instance, are devoted to him. I think he's a great guy and all the rest of that. On the other hand, in the world of football, and I have no way of proving this, I get the sense that his reputation is not as high as it is in the wider society. Although, of course, some of England's best performances in the past 8 years are the ones where Kane and Rashford and the midfielders have really clicked. On the back of all that, given that his football career has declined in the past 2 years, this is a huge moment for him, because if he disappears into the log pile at Barcelona, where next then, you know? I hope he doesn't.
And where next for Manchester United, because they need to shift him as well. And it's indicative of where he's at the moment, and it's indicative of the financial package involved for him, that they haven't been able to sell him permanently, even though they would have really liked to. And they tried to take a hard line on that at the start of the summer, and then just realised that they were not going to be able to shift him, if that's what they did, and they had to accept loan approaches as well. So, look, I want him to be great. You want him to be great. It would be a brilliant
Your
thing
son
if
loves
a top
him.
English player, both of them, in fact. Right. You know, I think that's the thing. As you said at the start, Danny, he's someone who transcends football, but his struggles in football have been such over the last couple of years that it's the focus on football that's just inevitable now, and he really needs to to be pulling up trees for a biggie. Look, he's got himself an enormous chance here after being able to be in the Champions League last season. And remember, Villa went a long way in terms of financial commitment, even to sign him on loan. In leaving Donyell Malen out of the Champions League squad after signing him for a decent chunk of change from Borussia Dortmund. And as I've said before, if I was Malen, I would not have been pleased with that at all. So there's been faith put in him there, and he managed to at least show a deal of willing to get back to his best there. We all want him to be great, but there's still loads to prove there.
Yes, somebody with less to prove, perhaps, is the teenage prodigy Lamine Yamal. We know he was 18 last week and got himself into a bit of trouble. And look, trouble that we discussed openly on talkSPORT. Myself and Simon Jordan had a good rustle through the leaves of the controversy over paying and hiring people with restricted growth and skeletal health problems to be entertainment initially at his 18th birthday party. I wonder if that was one of the reasons why, Andy, the announcement of his new contract, the signing of his new contract, and, of course, the critical, at least for, PR reasons, inheritance of the number 10 shirt at Barcelona was so low-key.
It was, Danny. They had a big gala signing event planned, and they scaled it down considerably. Because they had to, really. This was something that wasn't just prensa rosa, tattle, as they would call it in Spain. It was something that made it beyond the pages of Hola magazine. It was something that was being discussed by politicians. And really, I think a lot of people who should have known better got really stuck into Lamine Yamal, knowing everything that he's been through and everything that he's endured, actually. Remember, there was the attack on his father last year as well, which was awful. And really, he's handled himself in an incredibly mature way when you consider the pressure. Now, this 18th birthday party, look, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. And a combination of the both, I think, have organised something a little bit unsuitable for him. And he has been given the sort of kicking when really a little bit of a talking to probably would have done.
Look, Andy, as I said in rather more fruity language on the station during the week, all 18-year-olds are bleep, 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 bleep.
Yes.
Which of us would want our 18-year-old behaviour held up to scrutiny? But exactly. Of course, that's part of the job now. Of course, whether he likes it or not, decisions made for him by other people will be scrutinised as though he himself had signed the contracts, and he just needs to be, I guess, as careful, and people around him need to be as careful with him as they should be. My favourite story. Go on. Sorry.
That's right. And I was just going to say, Danny, it was quite a wholesome event, probably more so for being quite low key, actually. Him obviously getting Messi's old number 10 shirt or Ansu Fati's old number 10 shirt, depending on which way you're looking at it. Getting his pay rise that he completely deserves, and walking in not only dressed as Colonel Abrahams, but also arm in arm with his grandmother, which was lovely to see, because his grandmother was the first one from the family to stick up for him in public and say, look, it was nothing to do with him.
Thank you very much for that reference to 90s soul music as well. I'm sure people appreciate it greatly. Look, in the last year, one of the players that has caused my eyes to pop out of my head is Thiago Almada of Lyon, of Botafogo. Not quite sure which, because your friend John Textor is very much at the controls, but now signed as part of the Atletico Madrid rebuild. He's gone to Atletico. I mean, let's be honest, in the last 12 months, and I'll ask Tim Vickery about this, he's been Argentina's best player. And this is the all-conquering Argentina team. A terrible loss for Lyon if they ever really owned him. And how much money they're getting for him. But it's a great transfer. It's a brilliant piece of creativity for Atletico Madrid.
Yeah, and they've sometimes lacked that wit in midfield, haven't they? So I think he is the player above all of the ones that they've signed. And Johnny Cardoso, of course, signed from Betis this week, which, who knows, might push out Conor Gallagher. We'll have to see. They're having a monster transfer window. Again, they really feel they can take on Barcelona and Atletico. But I think it will be amazing if they sign a player more influential than Almada this summer. Look, he was brilliant when he arrived in France. Not easy for someone of his stature to thrive there, but he was fantastic. and I think he's glad to be away. He expected to stay in Lyon, and he was happy to stay in Lyon. But I think, on the other hand, he's probably relieved to be out of the Textor circus and in a different galaxy. But, of course, where does the money go? That's the other question, isn't it, Danny? Like you said, he was contracted to Botafogo. Lyon owned his economic rights. It seems that there's 21 million euros being spent for half of him half of those economic rights by Atletico. But where does the money go? Is it split between Botafogo and Lyon and Molenbeek? Look, depending on who you ask, there's a lot of different answers to it. And of course, Textor more self-consciously cutting his ties with Lyon this week.
Yeah, while continuing to go around to talkSPORT and UEFA and the rest of it, wearing his Botafogo shirt. Thank you for that, Andy. Listen, there is live sport tonight for us as well. The World Match Play Darts at Blackpool's in full swing. You can hear commentary over at talkSPORT 2. Let's get the very latest, though, from what's happening there. Here's Ian Danter.
Evening to you, Danny. Well, Luke Littler, the world champion, is on stage at the moment, and he was going like a hot knife through butter through Ryan Searle until Searle just took the 7th leg of the match. It is 6-1 in Littler's favour. He's trying to pile in the maximums. He's currently averaging 112 on stage. The long-standing record for an average at the World Match Play belongs to Phil the Power Taylor, the multiple winner of this event, with 114 average. Littler doing his best to set and break more records as he pops in a maximum, looking to go 7-1 up. Earlier tonight wins for Gary Anderson and Johnny Clayton, so the seeds are doing better tonight than they did this afternoon when all 4 seeded players went out in their first round matches. And before we're done tonight, Danny, live on talkSPORT 2, another all-English clash follows this one. Stephen Bunting will take on Ryan Joyce in the first round. It's also live on the talkSPORT Darts YouTube channel as well as talkSPORT 2. The World Match Play Darts continues at the Winter Gardens, Blackpool.
Listen, thank you very much indeed, Ian. We'll keep you up to date everything that happens there through Ian. If you want to listen to the darts, of course, that's over on talkSPORT 2. Next here on Trans-Europe Express, Andy and I, we're looking at everything that's happening in Germany, including the spectre of a certain Jurgen Klopp at RB Leipzig. Yeah, welcome back to Trans-Europe Express here on this Sunday evening. We're turning our attention now to the goings-on in Germany. The headline is, where's Woll? Voltemade. Yeah, I know. I absolutely know. Forgive us for that. Andy, that's one of two big stories. The Voltemade one is becoming a saga, but one of the two big stories that are coming out of Bayern Munich and their attempts to improve a team that they thought was going to go very, very deep, and of course they did, into the Champions League last year. The big one thereafter, though, is still Luis Diaz from Liverpool. Now, I'm a bit astonished, obviously with the death that occurred at Liverpool, which affected everybody so badly. The thought for him not being there to play, Núñez going, and Luis Diaz, are Liverpool going to change their entire forward line virtually? Mo Salah, of course, is a given. In the space of one transfer window. If you add Florian Wirtz to that, it's an amazing change.
Yeah, it is. And we knew that they were holding a little bit back for this transfer window, which I think was a smart way to do it. And of course, it looks a lot smarter when you had the first year that Arne Slot had. But I think it was always going to be the case whether Liverpool won the league or not last season. Of course, that makes it easier to do. And I think strengthening from a position of power is obviously the ideal way to do it. But it is turning into, I guess, more of a change than they might have initially imagined. Now, this can happen at clubs. Now, Luis Diaz, they've got a decision to make on him, obviously, because he's 2 years left on his contract. Because of that, it would be worth a lot more next summer than he is this summer. And especially the way that FSG do things, it would not surprise me if he moved at all, even though they would clearly like to keep him. He has been giving Bayern Munich encouragement at the very least for a couple of months now. They've been interested in him for a few months. For Bayern, they've had volume rather than quality in those wide positions really in recent years. Now, again, it depends if you include...
That's a huge statement, Andy. They've got some pretty brilliant wide players at that club.
Yeah, but I think if you think of them as the team that was for so long based around Ribéry and Robben, no one has come close to them since. Now,
that's your favourite Bayern Munich team of all time, isn't it?
You're damn right it is.
Yeah.
If you could put that together with that midfield that PSG used to have of Verratti, Matuidi and Thiago Motta, yeah, that's my team. I'm into that totally. I don't even care who the striker is at that point.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome along. You're listening to the dreams of a Wimbledon fan.
Yeah, they can all handle themselves as well physically. That's the important bit. But look, I think that Ribéry is an interesting one because look, we know there's ability and there have been good bits from Zane, from Coman, from Gnabry. I mean, Coman scored a winning goal in the Champions League final, for goodness sakes. But if you're talking about consistency, relentlessness, like those two guys had, there has been nothing to match them since. I think if you look at Luis Diaz and just his appetite, the ground he covers, there is not a player in world football that would be better at replacing Franck Ribéry. Even if maybe that's not their exact aim, but like as a wide player who would be a tone setter, because I don't think you can really say Jamal Musiala is a wide player. Of course, he drifts into wide areas, but he drifts into central areas as well. He's a bit different to that. He's not an out-and-out winger. Whereas if you're looking at an out-and-out winger, and I realise Luis Diaz played a lot as centre-forward last season and did a very good job doing so, but if you're looking at someone who will be relentless on fullbacks and score you goals, it's got to be Luis Diaz, right? So I can understand why they're going for him. There must be some sort of biting point, especially with the other moves that Liverpool are making, especially with Ekitike, when you look about them remodelling this front line. The fact that they've held on to Salah, I think, gives them a little bit more latitude as well. There's got to be a biting point where if Bayern hit it, it makes the deal worthwhile for Liverpool. I don't feel that that's probably that far away.
Okay, well, the same could be said, I suppose, about Nick Voltemade, the giant next to big thing in German centre-forward play. Now, his club, Stuttgart, play Bayern in the Super Cup in under a month. Which club do you think Voltemade will be playing for?
I'm going to say, much like Harry Kane 2 years ago, I think he'll be on the bench for Bayern and get booed a lot when he comes on as a 65th minute substitute. Obviously, Harry didn't have to go through that because he'd moved countries, but I think this move is inevitable, and it was inevitable from the moment that Voltemada went out and said to his agent, look, say no to everyone else. Say no to Napoli. If Real Madrid call, say no to them. I just want Bayern. They know what he's going to get paid when he gets there. But at the moment, if it's not an inevitability, pardon me, it's because they're so far apart on the fee. Now, I know Bayern are in a position where they don't want to have their pants pulled down, because this is a player who is a unicorn, really, in terms of his size, in terms of his skill set, how versatile he is, how much room for growth there is. And again, we're going back to players that are not just great now, but we feel that can turn into even greater players in years to come. And Voltemada definitely falls in that sort of category. I think it's easy to look at it from the outside and say, OK, they got him for free last summer from Werder Bremen when he couldn't even get in the team. And now they're getting offered 50 million euros by Bayern for him. But they have got, if we're talking about finding a biting point, Bayern and me in my first driving lesson, they're nowhere near finding the biting point at the moment. So I think at the moment, Bayern's strategy appears, having made a second offer that got knocked back out of hand, their strategy is not to make a third offer, because they don't want to annoy Stuttgart. They want to cultivate a good relationship with the board. And of course, there are other players that could be in play in the medium term. You look at Angelo Stiller, who I'm sure they would love to buy back. We know he's a favourite of Xabi Alonso, so maybe he ends up at Real Madrid at some point. Who knows? But Stiller is a brilliant player who, if he doesn't go this transfer window, will go one in the near future. So it's more aimed towards constructive discussion between the two clubs, especially as, of course, they're going to have to share the big dining room when it comes to the Super Cup.
OK, well, let's move on then to the Leipzig rebuild, which is in full swing as well. They bought 4 players in 26 hours, you told me. I guess the marquee name there is PSG's Johan Bakayoko. But that's not really the big story. Of course they're rebuilding, because Leipzig is a constantly ongoing project, which in recent two seasons has looked more likely to fail than succeed. Certainly they're not the glorious shining star example of how to do this stuff that they once were. But now they've got the added complication of Jurgen Klopp watching the training of the new squad over the garden fence.
Haven't they just? He's not just in the garden fence. He's brought a deck chair, Danny, and he gave this what I can only describe.
Lovely.
Yeah. Talking of drinks, if only they had something on tap to keep them up for those 26 hours while they were doing 4 players worth of negotiations. If only they had a case of that in the office. I think it was hilarious hearing Jurgen Klopp turn up to the first week of training in Leipzig and give this impromptu press conference at the side of the training pitch to all these journos, like stamping over each other to get their microphone nearer to him and going, well, yeah, I don't really want to talk about Ole Werner, the new coach, because I don't want to take any of the spotlight away from him. It's like, what are you doing?
Jurgen Klopp in the building.
Which is extraordinary. I mean, look, I think Ole Werner's a really smart signing, and Klopp was saying himself, look, it's not really about the trophies you've won, it's what you've done in comparison to the resources you have. He did a great job at Werder Bremen over the last couple of years. It was quite an acrimonious struggle to get the deal over the line, but they've got Werner in the end. They've got this new blood, and they're going back and doubling down on young players. Now they've got Johan Bakayoko is the most recognisable one from PSV, a young man modest enough to say it is his ambition to win the Ballon d'Or. Jan Diomande, who came across from Leganés, who's only 18, he looks terrific. Looked really good in La Liga in a ultimately failing battle to stay up last season. I like the look of him. But they're doubling down on that. I think they're not nearly done in terms of transfers. Now, I think Šeško, as we spoke about earlier, and Lois Openda are probably available for the right price. The right price is quite high in both cases, but they've got a chance, and Werner's got a chance. That's Ole, not Timo, who is still hanging about there with that move not having gone through yet. there is a chance for them to really shape something, because they're not in European football for the first time since they came up 7 years ago. So that's something that's a disappointment to them, but it does give them an opportunity to have a meaningful rebuild. But it was really important, as we said, as I think you might have suggested, that Klopp shows his face on the first day. There's been such a clamour for it in Germany. It's like, okay, well, you're the head of sport at Red Bull. What do you do? Where do you give your experience? Where do you show a bit of guidance? Because they've got quite a young sporting director in Marcel Schaefer, of course, was a title winner with Wolfsburg as a player, but he's been left with a lot to sort out, and with increasingly big numbers as well. You think of what they spent on Openda, you think of what they spent on Xavi Simons to sign him permanently, and again, Simons is one that might be away this summer if they can find the right offer for him.
Again, he's another one who's waving in the general direction of the Premier League, isn't he? You can see him doing it in the press.
Yeah, he is. I think the main question, Danny, is how do they get their money back? Because they know they spent too much on him, brilliant player as he is. He's been a little bit marginalised. He is a guy you build a team around, but who is ready to bet the farm on him and build a team around him at this very moment? I don't really know the answer to that. So, look, Werner may be a really good coach, and he is, in my opinion, a very good coach who could become a great one, but he does need that Klopp guidance, and this is the bit where we work out what he's really doing at Red Bull.
Listen, thank you very much, Steve, for that, Andy. Next up, we're going to look at Italy. Some really good stories there, including another club who you thought on the surface might not need, a bit like Liverpool, a massive rebuild, but that's exactly what Napoli are undergoing. We'll talk about that next here on Trans-Europe Express. Welcome back to Trans-Europe Express with me, Danny Kelly, him, Andy Brassell, and you, the listening millions. Andy, let's move our attention then immediately to Italy, where Napoli are really having like so many of these champion clubs, having a really, really wild transfer window so far. Let's call it, the headline is Napoli get nasty. Because they're bringing in more and more players. Obviously, we know Kevin De Bruyne has already started training there and all the rest of it. But Noah Lang's a player, a really interesting player. Again, formerly of PSV. Tell us about him, and is he, and could anyone ever be, a direct replacement for Kvaratskhelia?
Well, no one thinks he is, apart from him, I think. I love Noah Lang, and it's because he's such a confident boy. He really is. Now, we were sharing a little clip in the week. Of course, he used to play for Club Brugge before going back and succeeding at PSV, which is where Napoli have signed him from. There's a great clip that the Belgian League's official Twitter account put out in the week saying, go and do your stuff in Italy, Noah Lang. And it was showing him when Club Brugge were playing Antwerp, putting both feet on the ball, standing on the ball with both feet. And Toby Alderweireld, not that happy with him, I think it's fair to say, afterwards. I've never really wanted to incur the wrath of Big Toby, but Noah Lang, not bothered about it at all. He spoke about in his press conference, his introductory press conference in Naples, about wanting to really grasp the opportunity with both hands and seeing it as a motivation to replace Kvaratskhelia rather than something to be daunted by. Look, he plays in the same spot. Left winger with loads of tricks. I think to put him in this demanding environment where it's like, okay, well, you say you're that good, show us you're that good, I think would be really interesting, especially with like the reappraisal of Kvaratskhelia, since people have had a closer look at him through seeing him with PSG in the Champions League. They know what he does off the ball now. They know when he doesn't have the greatest game of his life, he's still super valuable to the team. So I think this reframing of Kvaratskhelia makes it even harder, really, for Noah Lang to match that. But it's a great challenge for him. Of course, they gave up on Darwin Nunez because it was just too expensive, so they signed Lorenzo Luca in the week. Big striker, 6'6", which is an interesting, I think, gradual handover from Romelu Lukaku, who is having a great time there at the moment with Antonio Conte, but I don't think he's going to stay there forever. But it gives him a bit of relief as well as he starts to get a few little aches and pains in his 30s. We had the arrival of Kevin De Bruyne, who bulked a little bit about being given the number 10 just for training, but still being given the number 10 at Napoli in any context is a lot.
You don't need that, do you? Even if you're Kevin De Bruyne, you don't need that pressure, do you? Let's be honest.
No, I mean, to paraphrase Lisa Simpson, making Kevin De Bruyne go red in the face is like shooting fish in a barrel, really. But still,
I would argue
a little
that,
blush by that.
Yeah, I would argue that you could give the goalkeeper the Maradona shirt. Of course, he was tremendous with his hands, wasn't he? Sam Bukema has also gone there from Bologna. But to me, Andy, the really astonishing transfer involving Napoli is that we now understand there's an agreement for a permanent deal with Galatasaray for Victor Osimhen for 75 million euros. Which trebles the previous record, nearly quadruples, but definitely trebles the previous transfer record for a Turkish club. It's the equivalent of Spurs going out and getting Xavi Simons, for instance, and saying, yeah, we'll pay 350 million for him. Why not? It's an incredible transfer.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And we talked about how things have changed so much in Turkey in recent years. So we were surprised to see Icardi go there. And we thought it could never be permanent. It became permanent. We were surprised to see Osimhen go there. We thought it could never be permanent. It's becoming permanent. Yeah. And, there are other big deals like John Durand, Fenerbahce. We'll talk a bit more about Fenerbahce later. But this, again, is a little bit like Gyökeres digging his heels in. Now, of course, he's in a similar position, I suppose, to Gyökeres, Victor Osimhen, in that there's not the market out there for him that you might have expected with the way that PSR and FFP is at the moment. There needs to be a bit more of a future, they feel. I mean, Osimhen's only 26 and he's an unbelievable goal scorer. But he has dug his heels in getting the move he wanted. He's turned down several approaches from Saudi. Of course, he'll be very, very well paid in the Turkish Super League. We expect 16 million euros a year after tax, but it's a huge deal on every level, of course, that is being partly financed by businesses and sponsorships. It's going to work very well, I think, for Galatasaray, and it'll work very well for Osimhen. He knows it's the place for him. Of course, they get directly into the Champions League this season because of Turkish clubs flying up the coefficient as well. Yeah. And Napoli finally have the money to be able to spend. He's been almost a sunk cost for the last year and a half. They signed this new contract with him a year and a half ago thinking, okay, we only have to pay this for 6 months. And then not only did he have a massive panic about being stuck at Napoli, they had a massive panic about having to pay his massive wages that they never budgeted for paying for more than 6 months. So, look, it's good that he's going to have a permanent home where we're going to be able to enjoy him doing what he does again and again and again. And it's good for Napoli. And part of the the reason they're able to satisfy Antonio Conte in the transfer market, because there's more to come. You talked about new goalkeeper Vanja Milinkovic-Savic. He's made it pretty clear that he would rather go to Napoli than Leeds, so we expect that move to happen, and maybe a few more too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only hurrying you up there a little bit, Andy. I mean, we're not blowing our own trumpet here. We've been noting the change in the tone of Turkish football clubs in the transfer market. This is the big sign that they are coming big time now for players further west in Europe. Ademola Lookman is the African Footballer of the Year. I can't believe there isn't much interest in him from the Premier League, but of course we still remember the young Ademola, who wasn't the complete player, but now Inter Milan are favourites to get him.
Yeah, they are, and again, I think it comes back to the age, Danny. 27 years old. I mean, it's not exactly old, is it? But
no, it makes me feel old. It looks like I remember him playing as a 17-year-old, and I can. Yeah.
I was there when he scored against my team for Charlton. So I've been on the Lookman bandwagon since the beginning. No, I do wonder if it's partly the age, and we talked about how that affects the transfer market at the moment, and partly the sense that I do wonder if English clubs look at him and still think of that guy who chipped up that soft penalty for Fulham against West Ham, which is ridiculous, by the way, because since then he's had some brilliant seasons in Italy. He's come back from disappointment at Leipzig when the permanent move there didn't really work out. He's just a terrific footballer. He's proved he's brilliant at every level since he's been at Atalanta. He had that massive fallout with Gianpiero Gasperini, didn't let it affect him, just got on with being brilliant. And look, if he goes to another slightly bigger Italian club, if he ends up at Inter, I think he'll be brilliant for them. I think the fact that he can play wide, he can play in a three, he could maybe relieve Lautaro and Marcus Thuram, given the moment as well, because we know he can be a prolific goal scorer. There's so much to recommend him. They think they can probably get a deal done for about 40 million euros. Napoli inquired about him halfway through last season when they were trying to replace Kvaratskhelia and got short shrift at the time, and the inquiry didn't go any further. But look, I just think he's a terrific player. He's having a great time in Italy. Seeing him play for a team that really have a realistic shot at winning the league and at going deep in the Champions League, and it would just be brilliant to see. I think he deserves that. His commitment over the last couple of years has been outstanding. I think you can genuinely say over the last 2 years he's been one of the top 20 players in Europe. I rate him that highly, and I think his record speaks for itself.
Thank you very much. Just a little bit of breaking news for you. You mentioned Gasperini. These days, of course, at Roma, Evan Ferguson, who really does need a sort of a turbo boost to his career, is now, tonight we're hearing, is in Roma looking to sign. It will be a loan with an option to buy, not a guarantee that they're going to move for him. And he very quickly, yeah.
But Danny, have you seen his arrival at the airport? I mean, he arrived at the airport an hour or so ago, and the greeting there, he must have gone into arrivals and thought, hang on, have I signed for Galatasaray or Fenerbahce by accident? There was so many fans waiting there for him, like all shouting, cheering loudly. You couldn't take the smile off his face, getting loads of selfies with the fans. And look, this is great. If he can take off in Rome, the way that they fill the stadium, and they have done over the last couple of years, it's an ambitious project with a great coach. He could have a great time there. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and from personal view, the Republic of Ireland need Evan to become the player we all thought he was going to be. That first hour has flown by. I guarantee you the second and third will do the same. Keep listening to us for all the latest from across the world of football here on Trans Europe Express.
Ryder Cup. Unique, euphoric, unanimously loved. Here's the history and some of the key numbers behind the contest that grips the world of golf and beyond like no other. The first edition was held in 1927, where a Great Britain team arrived by boat to play in Massachusetts at the Worcester Country Club. Originally, the competition comprised of 4 foursomes and 8 singles, with 4 balls not introduced until 1963. In the first 22 editions, when it was just Brits and Irish against the US, America only lost 3. So, in 1979, in came the rest of Europe, including the future 5-time Ryder Cup winner, Seve Ballesteros. Since Team Europe was established, the head-to-head reads Europe 13, USA 9. Home advantage is a big deal. Europe's last away win was the miracle at Medina in 2012, and America hasn't won on European soil since '93 at the Belfry. It's accepted that both teams tailor their home courses to suit their own players. For example, in Paris in 2018, Thomas Bjorn asked for the rough to be kept extra long beyond the green to target the big booming American drives. 10 years earlier, Paul Azinger did the opposite, and the Valhalla rough was trimmed right down. On both occasions, the home side were resounding winners. So what about the money? The most recent Ryder Cup in Rome drew in a record 271,000 spectators and boosted the Italian economy by €262 million. In the US, the PGA America TV deal with NBC is worth $440 million. But no Ryder Cup revenue has ever gone directly to individual players. That's until now. In 2025, for the first time ever, the US team will each receive a fee for playing in New York. Of course, in Rome, legend has it Patrick Cantley refused to wear his cap because he wasn't being paid to wear it, though he insisted it simply didn't fit. Either way, Team Europe have made it clear they're more than happy to keep playing for the sheer thrill, joy and prestige of the Ryder Cup.
Yeah, welcome back to Trans-Europe Express here tonight on talkSPORT. I'm Danny Kelly. Andy Brassell is with me as well. Look, this morning we woke up here at talkSPORT to the news that the legendary golf commentator, very much the voice of golf here on talkSPORT, and my colleague for the best part of 20 years, Bob Bubka, had passed away. It's a really stunning blow here at talkSPORT because his voice has been the voice that we've listened to, particularly on Trans-Europe Express, as the 3 big American tournaments each year reach their climax. It was Bob who described the action to us. He was very close as well to our golf correspondent, Rupert Bell, and Rupert has made this tribute to his fallen colleague.
Radio is about voices, and there is no doubt when you heard Bob Bubka speak, it just grabbed you. Unmistakable and iconic, coupled with a wonderful, unique style, his distinctive American tones enthralled and entertained talkSPORT listeners for over 25 years. His love of the game of golf shone through, coupled with a cheeky, almost rebellious element, made him not only a delight to listen to, but in my case, to work with. His golfing journey began relatively late in his career as he started out as a car salesman, but a few slots on American local radio led to expanding it to a full-time career. His first major moment, the Jack Nicklaus Masters in '86. His talkSPORT life began in the very late 90s, which of course coincided with the total dominance of Tiger Woods. Our paths first crossed covering a tournament in Germany in 2000, where Tiger was playing. And Bob came face to face with Jeff Boycott. What a pairing, particularly as Bob hadn't a clue who Jeff was. Bob was unashamedly biased when it came to Tiger Woods, in awe of his achievements, particularly as he had been brought up in the Nicholas Palmer era. Testament to Bob is that Tiger always seemed to search him out to say hello. Bob and I would see each other at maybe 2 or 3 tournaments a year, and it was never dull. His ever-loyal partner Janice having to work overtime to keep him in check. And in those early days, when it would be true to say Bob loved a party, the work hard, play hard motto was writ large in Bob, creating a larger-than-life figure. But throughout, his love of the traditions and heritage of golf always revealed itself, none more so than around the Ryder Cup, which Bob wrote a book about. The biannual tournament was incredibly important to him, and he loved flying the American flag, even in the face of some disastrous American performances. In later years, Bob's health made it difficult to travel, and his last Open in situ was at St Andrews in 2021. He loved being there, and the relish which he drove his motorised wheelchair around the city was fantastic. But what he also loved was the interaction with talkSPORT listeners. And I know in the end, being part of the talkSPORT family was so important to him as he struggled with ill health. But even when physically frail, that voice never faltered. Covering the majors will never be the same without that extraordinary voice drawing us in to the magnificent sport of golf. Bob, we'll miss you.
Yeah, lovely. And I know very, very personal thoughts there from Rupert Bell. I might just add that I used to always use the phrase when introducing Bob, he's going to pour honey into my ears. That was the quality of the voice. But of course, he was a brilliant journalist and broadcast and organizer of language as well. I will really miss what he would, of course I will. I would ask him the first question to go, there's a great question, Danny. You don't get that very, very often. Of course, he'll be remembered, and of course we miss him, but I don't really want to add any more to what Rupert said there, because I think he said it all. Bob Bubka is gone from us, but we won't forget him. And Bob Bubka was a consummate professional, as you heard there, which means he would want us to get on with the show. So it's now time for this.
Mbappe, Mbappe, Mbappe! Sa carrière, le Paris Saint-Germain, Mbappe! Mbappe! Little give and go, Mbappe's in! Oh, it's 2-2! He scored twice in 2 minutes! Tête de Kylian Mbappe. Allez, Kylian!
Yes, Andy, let's go, as we use Mbappe Watch as always, to look at matters pertaining to Real Madrid. And if Barcelona's contract unveiling for Lamine Yamal was a public occasion that didn't go quite to plan, then you could say the same about the press conference designed to celebrate the departure of a great servant of Real Madrid, Lucas Vázquez.
That's right. It was not a huge PR win for Real Madrid in general, because only 2 players turned up. Andre Lunin, the reserve goalkeeper, and Kylian Mbappe. Now, it was a big PR win for Kylian Mbappe because he broke off his holiday to make sure he was there to pose with Lucas Vázquez, to celebrate his career. Now, look, it would be easy to look at it as a bit Machiavellian, and if that's your view, I understand that totally.
Sure.
But whether it was or it wasn't, so much of being a Real Madrid player is not just about playing well, it's about being seen to do the right thing, being seen to do the good thing for the good of the club. And he has done that. Now, if we bear in mind that since Kylian Mbappe burst into most people's consciousness in the 2018 World Cup, maybe for the more Eurocentric of us in 2016-17 when he won the league with Monaco. But after the 2018 World Cup, he was unavoidable. He was a teenager who bore statistical comparison with Pelé. And if you look at the numbers ever since, there's not really much to argue with, but there's also very little to argue against the fact that his popularity amongst football fans, amongst the French, amongst some Real Madrid fans after he didn't accept the move there the first time has plummeted really since for a number of different reasons. So for him to do something like this has made a massive, massive impact in Madrid and in the Madrid media, where he has been overwhelmingly praised for just really giving something for the club and showing that he understands what representing Real Madrid is about. So in terms of what was a challenging first season for him, of course, the numbers are fantastic in terms of 44 goals in all competitions, but they didn't win anything. So it didn't really mean that much. So just before he starts his sophomore season, this was exactly the right impression to make.
Yeah, I mean, I can't get over the fact that, Real Madrid is a global corporation these days, and the PR of only two players, and one of them, Andriy Lunin, God bless him, hardly a high-profile first-teamer, though an excellent goalkeeper, by the way. It just doesn't bear thinking about. The next PR hurdle they've got to deal with, and the next footballing mess they've got to deal with, is the ongoing and rather slow, and from what you tell me, Andy, slowing contract talks between themselves and Vinicius Jr., arguably the best player in the world, where there is still a decent gap between the two parties, and a third party, viz. Saudi Arabia, lurking.
Now, like Mbappe, he had a strange last season. But as you say, when we talk about the best player in the world, he's not mentioned nearly often enough, and he should be, because he is one of the absolute greatest. But he's been in a strange situation with Real Madrid for a while now. Just a couple of years left on his contract, so they want to extend or sell, ideally. Obviously, he is a player that they would like to make a Real Madrid lifer, but the gap between what they're prepared to offer and what he would want at the moment are significant. Now, this is partly a surprise because, of course, these negotiations have been going on for a very long time, but we were led to believe that his contract extension was pretty much done and it would be announced as soon as the Club World Cup was over. Yep. Now, again, we talked about Lamine Yamal and optics earlier, and the optics of how and when to announce a contract extension. It was a little bit awkward because, of course, Mbappe and Vinicius were heavily criticised for their role in that heavy defeat in the Club World Cup semi-final to Paris Saint-Germain, Mbappe's old club. But still, it's been a surprise to learn how far they are apart. So it seems as if he wants something in the region of 35 million euros a year. And Real Madrid are prepared to offer like half that, maybe 60%, like not nearly enough as far as he's concerned at the moment. Now, what Vinicius has always been able to do is use the Saudi Pro League as the bogeyman. I'm not completely sold on the idea that he wants to go there. I think if he really wanted to go there, he would have gone already. Real Madrid would have trousered a transfer fee that is more than acceptable to him, and he would be making more money than pretty much anyone in football at the moment. But in terms of trying to get them closer to that figure, and bear in mind, he could make what, 8-10 times that if he went to Saudi, maybe nearer 7 or 8 than 10, but a lot more than he's ever making at Real Madrid or any European competition. But if they've got a limit that they're prepared to go to, then that's that. And this is something that's happening all around European football. We've talked about Gianluigi Donnarumma's own situation at PSG, where he is a year from the end of his contract. Now, we don't often see elite players go to a year from the end of their contract, especially at the very biggest clubs. But he's hoping to be remunerated in the same sort of level as previous stars of PSG were. It doesn't really work like that anymore. They're not going to renew his contract on the deal on which he signed in the first place. Remember, he signed on a free transfer, of course. It really is interesting, Andy, to me. Sorry to jump in. It really is interesting to me that the effect of the Saudi money pouring in has not been to raise the wages of their European players, but to actually set a kind of de facto wage ceiling
because the European clubs say, well, if it just becomes about wages, we can't afford what Al Hilal or whoever, whichever club it is, can offer them. So we have to organise ourselves accordingly. It's been a really interesting, I think, unexpected consequence of the arrival of the Saudi market.
I agree, Danny. It's like chicken, isn't it? Like it's really a pointless argument for Vinny to use, isn't it? To say, well, you know, maybe the Saudis want to pay me 200 million a year, and
then you want to play in Saudi, do you?
Go get it then. Go get it then, because you're never going to get it here. And yeah, you're right. There's no pretense in lining up for that. It's quite interesting. Newer PSG contracts, and bear in mind, we've always felt, and a lot of people have always felt, that PSG are not really as beholden to FFP limitations as other clubs. Of course, they are to a certain degree, but you know that they're a lot closer with UEFA than they used to be. You know, that was one of the unexpected side effects of the failure of the initial failure of the Super League project. That Nasser Al Khelaifi got himself higher up in the ECA. But they've also drawn a line post superstars, post Messi and Neymar and Mbappe. They've said, okay, this is our limit. If you want to get paid more, go out and earn it. So there is a bonus structure now that will bring you up to nearer that old figure, or maybe even a bit above. And Donnarumma's found it quite hard to get his head around that. Of course, he has been in a situation where he's probably quite comfortable running out of contract because he's been there before. He's marshalled that situation with Milan and ending up at PSG in the end. But interesting to see what happens with him. And it's interesting to see that some of the biggest names in the game and some of the best players in the game just can't go out there and say to a club anymore, this is what I want and this is what you're going to pay me.
You know, I think this is a combination, Andy, and we've got to end the section, we're running a bit late, of a combination of the shadow of the Saudi money being uncompetitive with, and American owners which dominate now the Premier League, who are not used to being pushed around by footballers, and who genuinely believe, because of the draft system they've grown up under, you can replace almost anybody. Really, really interesting. Next, we'll be joined by Anil Kandola, who'll be bringing us all the other transfers that are making waves in and around Europe and the Premier League. That's coming up next here on Trans-Europe Express. Yeah, more transfer news for you very, very soon here on Trans-Europe Express. We always want to keep you bang up to date with everything that's happening at the World Match Play Darts in Blackpool. It's live over on talkSPORT 2, but let's get a flavour now from Mark Wilson.
Yeah, good evening, Danny. A tough afternoon for the Seeds. All four of them went out, but they're making serene progress tonight. Gary Anderson beat Luke Woodhouse 10-5 early on. Johnny Clayton a 10-7 winner over Martin Schindler. And we've just seen Luke Littler win his first game on the Blackpool stage here. Averaged 108.92 as he saw off Ryan Searle 10 legs to 2. Did threaten a tournament record average at one point, but settled for 108.92. Heathfield faced Jermaine Watamina on Wednesday night. Final game of the night, Stephen Bunting is 4-2 up over Ryan Joyce. As he said, it's live over on talkSPORT 2, where Bunting leads Joyce by 4 legs to 2.
Thank you very much. As I keep saying, if you want to hear the darts live, that's over on talkSPORT 2. We don't want to lose you, but we like to give you the choice here on the talkSPORT network. Joining us now, talkSPORT's transfer czar, Anil Kandola. Good evening, Anil.
A very good evening to you, gentlemen. A pleasure. I think it is my debut on the Trans-Europe Express, so to join the two titans of the sports broadcasting industry is a big pleasure of mine, so thank you for welcoming me.
I already like Anil more than I expected. Fantastic. Thank you very, very much indeed, Anil. And, of course, if I'd brought my legendary trumpet with me, I'd have blown it in your direction now to announce your debut. Listen, you gave us a list of things you want to talk about, but we didn't get a chance, really, because we were being overtaken by events, to talk about Evan Ferguson to Roma, but now the news has broken that he's actually in the Eternal City. So what's happening with that transfer?
Yeah, this one's a very interesting one, certainly. You know, given the fact that Evan Ferguson was a really big name not so long ago in terms of the Premier League. I remember a time where Manchester United were quietly showing their interest in the player, and there were rumours anyway going around that it would be £100 million bargain, if you like, on his head. But that doesn't seem to be the way it goes. Of course, the previous ACL injury has really limited his top-flight experience. But look, the future seems to be very bright for young Evan Ferguson. AS Roma, what an absolute huge move this is. It's a one-year loan deal initially for the 20-year-old, and that does include a €14 million option to buy at the end of the loan period. I do believe, if my research does me correctly, that he will be the first Irish player in Roma's history. So that is an achievement in itself. And of course, the Roma manager, Gasperini, he is betting on Ferguson's potential to break out and, of course, hopefully anyway, avoid them injury concerns. So, yeah, a really exciting move, and really one, hopefully, for Evan Ferguson's case anyway, to really kickstart his career.
Yeah, and those of us broadcasting from the Republic of Ireland really do need Evan to kick on now. And hopefully Gasperini, who's a great manager, of course, will help him do that, Andy.
Yeah, Bohemians need the sell on as well. I've been told from Ireland, so they're very much hoping that he makes a success of it over there. But when we talk about players going and trying their luck in another country, we should probably talk about Galatasaray and he'll be interested in Ederson. Now, interesting goalkeeping situation at Manchester City at the moment, with it looking like James Trafford could be going back there instead of Newcastle. So you have to ask what the future is for Ederson. Probably had his weakest season for Manchester City last season, but still remains one of the very best goalkeepers in the world. We know Galatasaray are looking for a new goalkeeper after the retirement of Fernando Muslera, a real stalwart there. They've shown interest in a few big goalkeepers. They've shown a lot of interest in Ederson. He's not insensitive to the possibility of moving out to the Turkish Super League, but it feels like there could be a really long way to go on this one, because City would be looking for a fee and a half, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You're bang on there. Look, at the end of the day, I can't echo enough in terms of it probably wasn't his strongest season in the last campaign. Of course, when you factor in stuff like the fact that he is in his final year officially now in his Manchester City contract, of course, that would potentially give Galatasaray some potential leverage, you know, in terms of any negotiations. But Manchester City are aware, we understand here at talkSPORT, that talks with Ederson, in terms of any personal terms, that seems to be quite smooth sailing if there ever is such a thing in these crazy transfers. But yeah, you know, I think in a wider aspect, look, with Galatasaray, the movements that they've been making, you know, in the past season or two, it has become a real attractive prospect for massive names across Europe. You know, a former Manchester City player like Leroy Sané, he's of course officially announced there. We've got Victor Osimhen, from what we're hearing anyway, on the verge of completing that move as well.
Incredible.
It's just phenomenal, isn't it? You know, and I have followed Galatasaray for quite some time. I did have a very close Turkish friend of mine who was a big fan and always kept me up to date with it. So, you know, with someone like Muslera moving on, that is going to be a very big void to fill, not just in terms of his ability on the pitch, but of course that needed experience within the dressing room and of course amongst the younger players. So I think Ederson does fit all of them, but as Andy's already pointed out, it won't exactly be an easy one. But yeah, I would say for sure, definitely keep your eye on this over the next few days, because we could see some significant movement.
Look, I guess anybody who watches the game closely knows that Ruben Amorim has Anil got. He's almost like whack-a-mole. Every department of the team needs improving, and perhaps the most high-profile area is, can they go for another season with Andre Onana making the kind of critical mistakes that he has done? Well, sometimes he plays great, of course, but he does make critical mistakes. And I see you've left me a note here that United are interested in Sen Lammens, the Antwerp goalkeeper. Now, is that as backup, or are they looking to somehow replace Onana for next season?
Yeah, this is, I think, a really interesting aspect in terms of what exactly would his potential role be at Manchester United. Of course, Onana did suffer that injury in preparation for the pre-season. Of course, that does open the door a little bit. And I do think if, Ruben Amorim had a limited amount of money to spend, I do think he would replace Onana with a more recognised number one goalkeeper. But ultimately, this is the situation that Manchester United are in at the moment. They do need to replace a lot of their players on a very limited budget. And I think someone like Sen Lammens, he does open that door. Of course, he had that breakthrough season last season as Antwerp's number one. I've been crunching some of the numbers, gentlemen, and in them 41 appearances, he's registered, I believe, 173 saves, which equates to about 4.3 per match. And if you ask any Manchester United fan, that 4.3 per match probably would have come in handy in certain games last season. But look,
it doesn't speak highly of Antwerp's defenders either, does it? Let's be honest.
Exactly that. But look, jokes aside, I think this one will really ramp up in the next few days. Their club sporting director, the legend that is Mark Overmars, he did confirm that he expects the goalkeeper to leave, with, of course, interest from Manchester United being very strong at the moment. So yeah, I don't necessarily think this will be a goalkeeper that will come straight into the team and take over from Onana. But as we already saw last season with Bayinda, they will get an opportunity to impress. And of course, Bayinda didn't do that. But for Manchester United fans' sake anyway, I hope Sen Lammens does that if, of course, he does make the move to Old Trafford.
One I wasn't expecting to ask you, Anil, was a New Zealand international leaving Serie A to join Wrexham. This is an interesting one. We keep saying there's got to be a ceiling for Wrexham, but I don't think anyone's told Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds, or if they have, they're not listening.
Exactly that, and I think that's a lesson for all of us to learn. You don't tell Hollywood stars that there's a ceiling on what they want to achieve in life. But yeah, this is a really fascinating story. This is one that really caught my eye in the last day or two. Liberto Cacachi from Empoli, he is joining Wrexham. The 24-year-old, as you've already said, New Zealand international, is now the club's most expensive transfer in terms of Wrexham. It is valued at around $4 million. It's very close to that. Of course, his very significant season last season, I think it was 76 Serie A appearances, and I think this signing is really a part of the idea of Wrexham, not necessarily just to maintain within the Championship, but ultimately push for that promotion. And as you've already said, just when you think, okay, well, they've done really well to get to this stage, they keep on pushing, they're signing big names, experience within Europe. And it's going to be yet again another season to really watch out for what I like to call anyway the Hollywood club of English football.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the face-off between Tom Brady and the Wrexham gang at some stage in the Championship. It should be very, very good indeed. I mean, look, you can say what you like about the slightly false way in which the Wrexham are doing this. What you can't pretend that it's not A, interesting, B, they're spending the money on football things rather than messing about with hotels and stuff. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic story. And I'm going to say a third thing here. I always like the English top division to have a Welsh club in it. So why not Wrexham? And there's a phrase I didn't thought I'd be saying 3 years ago either. Let's be truthful. Listen, Anil, it's been a great debut. You can come back again.
Oh, yes. That's my transfer story confirmed. Thank you, gentlemen. I'll pass the good news on to my loved ones.
To quote someone else, Anil, here we go.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Pleasure.
Up next, Andy will be getting stuck into his favourite subject, football in France. inevitably, the course of a programme like this in the last 2 years, we end up talking about transfers to Saudi Arabia. It has been one of the most seismic shifts in European football. But sometimes we're seeing players go there and not liking it, or not enjoying it, or not staying for another reason. You might call it the Jordan Henderson syndrome. And now it's happening with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who went to Saudi Arabia, Andy, late in his career, but has now got what it looks like a great move for him, has moved back to Marseille and to the tender mercies of De Zerbi.
Yeah, that's right. He's arriving to sign on Tuesday, it looks like. The medical's tomorrow. And this has all moved quite quickly since he's had his contract cancelled by Al-Qadsiya, where he went. And Marseille were a little bit miffed by that when he went last year, because he had a difficult start at the Velodrome, and then really by the end of the season he had the club in the palm of his hand. The fans really warmed to him after not really getting along with him brilliantly at first. They saw his commitment, they saw his desire to do more off the ball as well, sort of recalling his St Etienne days, the striker that he hadn't been for a very long time, even though he's well into his 30s, and his proper investment, someone who really fed off the atmosphere of the Velodrome. And that's not always a given. Like, the pressure there is among the biggest in world football, I would say, is something that only certain players can deal with. It's not just about talent there. I know we say that about football all the time, but even more so at Marseille, even for footballers who know how to deal with that, it's not just about talent. It's about being able to mentally deal with the extraordinary pressure. Once you've got it on your side, I think it feels amazing, and we've seen that from some players. We've seen that from De Zerbi as a coach, who has said what an incredible place it's been for him. He wanted to hold on to Aubameyang last summer. He was disappointed when he went to Saudi. It seems to have been not his choice. The Al-Qadsiya have said, OK, we want to get younger. So we know he's into his mid-30s now. So they've decided to cut him. But, I mean, what a great place for him to go back. I think there was a part of him that regretted going in the first place, that regretted not being able to finish the job at Marseille. And they're in a good position because, of course, they're back in the Champions League. They're not so reliant on him because, I mean, Gouiri's come in and done a really good job as well. So having Aubameyang back will be great, but there won't be immediate pressure on him to do everything like there was before. You know, he's someone who can be a contributor rather than someone who's going to be lent on so heavily. And especially as he gets older, that's important. I think really the investment that Aubameyang's made in himself is considerable, because he is smart enough to have looked at it and thought, OK, well, I'm not going to be lightning. He's still very quick, of course, but he's not the lightning he once was. And I think he's worked out that he needs to be closer to that player he was at St Etienne, that player who ran the channels, who created for others. He's always had the brain to be able to do it, but maybe that wasn't his focus. And maybe sparing himself some of that work when he was in his peak has allowed him to continue to be at a high level for this long. But look, on a free, it's a tremendous pickup for Marseille.
Listen, Andy, there were times there that you will have noticed, and anyone who's watching us on, on the super smart TVs and YouTube and what have you, will notice I wasn't paying 100% attention to you, which is not my normal way. I've got some breaking news here that starts out looking very, very bad, but there's actually so far a slightly better aspect to it. Among others, The Sun are reporting that the Spurs and England great Paul Gascoigne has been rushed to hospital. He was found semi-conscious by a pal on Friday evening, apparently, in the bedroom of his home in Poole, Dorset, there on the south coast. And of course, anyone who's followed Gazza closely over the years would be terribly worried by that. The most gifted English footballer of his generation by a street. Now, I understand that here, again from this report, that Paul, who's 58 years of age, was admitted to an intensive care ward, but has now been moved, this is the good part of it, out of intensive care into acute medical unit, where his condition is described as stable. I don't have any more details than that. No doubt the good folk at talkSPORT's news department will be working feverishly to get more on that. But from what the basic facts are, found not very well in his home on Friday, moved to intensive care, as you'd expect, but now into acute care, which shows that the medical people perhaps are more hopeful with their prognosis. We'll try and get more for you as the evening unfolds here on talkSPORT. Andy, we already talked about Thiago Almada leaving Lyon, which I think might be in Atletico Madrid's part. We'll see. It might turn out to be one of the pickups of the year. But the clear out at Lyon, presumably, even though they're going to be in they're going to be in the first division in France, and they're going to be in the Europa League. You'd think they'd be strengthening their squad, but of course their financial position means they probably have to clear it out. Jordan Veretout looks like he's on his way. Who else, Andy?
Yeah, so the ideal is to get rid of following Adrielson, who's gone to the Middle East, having only played a couple of first-team games there. Originally came over from Botafogo in the same deal as Lucas Perry. That Jordan Veretout is going to be one, again, going to Qatar. They're hoping to shift big earners who they don't really want anymore. Dié Chaleta Sarr is also on that list. A couple of others. The ones they don't want to get rid of, especially having lost Cherki and Almada, they don't want to lose Malek Fofana if they can possibly avoid it. They don't want to lose George Mikatadze. But look, I don't think they can rule anything out at the moment because the new management has come in. And yeah, Lucas Perry. I think he's got to be a possibility, and I think the sort of profile that he is, the sort of physical profile that he is, definitely interests a few Premier League teams. Exactly. So look, we're not quite looking at a fire sale yet, but we are looking at a tightening of belts. We are looking at giving opportunities to younger players. Paulo Fonseca's looking at doing that in the friendlies, and they had their first friendly yesterday and at Villefranche, and they're certainly looking to do that, but they're also looking to bring younger players in. That's the next idea. It's going to be a more youth-focused model.
Listen, this is a unique situation for any football club. You go into the transfer window in the Conference League and the second level of French football. Halfway through the transfer window, you've been promoted in both competitions, effectively, back into Ligue 1 and into the Europa League. What looks like a good season for Lyon, given this maelstrom of activity and, as I say, expectations changing even of what competitions you're going to be in? What looks like a good season for Fonseca and gang in 9 months' time?
I mean, it would have been Europa League or nothing for Lyon in terms of staying up or going down. You know, if they'd have gone down, it would have been nothing. But in terms of the Europa League, I guess in most years Lyon would be amongst the favourites, particularly when we're not getting teams dropping out. They could have won it last year, of course.
I'm not sure about that, Andy. There were some great teams in that Europa League last year.
Yeah, that's right. They went down in extraordinary circumstances at Man United, of course, last year. But look, I think it's very different this year. I don't think they can be considered a genuine contender to that, even with the Europa League again having a weaker field than it would have had in the years when it had that synergy with the Champions League. I'm wondering if mid-table is more or less where they're looking this year. Now, they've talked a good game, and Michelle Kang, the new president, she's talked a good game and said, look, sporting success is how we start making money again. But they're going to have to do that by doing it with young players. I think this is comparable to the financial crash of 12, 13 years ago that followed the Claude Puel era, where they spent a load of money on players and didn't really succeed, you know, with signings like Ederson, with Johan Gourcuff, Michel Bastos, Ali Sissoko, which didn't really work out, and they ended up paying for that for a really long time. So I think they'll be pushing towards the European places. Whether they'll make it, I don't know. It depends on the progression of some of those young players. Interestingly, one of the young players who looks like he's coming in is one of Patrick Kluivert's younger sons, Ruben, who has been playing at centre-back in the Portuguese top flight with Casapia. He seems to be quite close to a move there. So a familiar name, but an unfamiliar figure maybe figuring in Ligue 1 next season.
Well, an equally, an even more familiar name, but one who hasn't featured in football at all, really, in the last 2.5 years, is that of Paul Pogba. Now, we know he's signed for Monaco. It's a brave move for Monaco. It's equally brave for Paul. He's going to have to display what's left of his football talent, and it may be a lot, who knows, at a very high level. It would have been easy to slope off to America or somewhere where he might have got an easier ride. He was in the UK this weekend, but he's not yet ready to play.
No, that's right. Monaco have been training at St George's Park, and have had a training camp in England. They played Nottingham Forest at Chesterfield yesterday, a 0-0 draw. But Pogba's not ready to play yet. He's not ready to be on the bench yet. He was there in Monaco tracksuit, but just in the stand. It's what they call athletic re-education in France. So plenty of gym, plenty of running, all that sort of stuff. And the fact is that Ligue 1 is a very physical league, Danny. So for him to get to the point where he's going to be able to even be on the bench is going to take a little while. And there was always an understanding of that when he signed for Monaco. There is an opportunity for him to be a very important senior player there. But if we're talking about Pogba being a possibility for France for the 2026 World Cup, the clock's ticking quite loud already, I would suggest.
Yeah, you know what, Andy? Call me whatever you want. That never even occurred to me that Paul Pogba would be good enough for the French squad, given the riches that they have.
It's occurred to him. Let me tell you.
No, that's okay. It's good to have ambition. It's good to, really, I mean it. It's good to have ambition. It never occurred to me that he'd be going to the World Cup with France. How very, very interesting. And let me ask you a question. I've got a couple of minutes here to get this answer out of you. Forgive me, I'm throwing this straight to you. With Lyon weakened, let's not say fatally weakened, but weakened, obviously PSG are going to be ultra short odds favourites to be to repeat their title victory of last year. Of course, they're the best team. Chelsea, the best team in the world. Paris Saint-Germain look like the best team in the world just now. Who will be second and third in France next year?
Third is a difficult question, I think, because Monaco's transfer strategy is risky, to say the least. Going big on Pogba, on Eric Dyer, on Ansu Fati, players who, to greater or lesser extents, have physical limitations, particularly at the start of the season, I think is a risk. It could really pay off. It could go really badly. We just don't know at this point in time. I think Marseille are the safest bet for second that you could possibly imagine. Now, I think what works really well for them is they've kept together most of what they had last season. No big losses, which I think is really important. They've got stability in all the key positions. They've had a year of De Zerbi, so they're used to working with him, and him having no European football, I think, was really important last season in terms of getting his ideas across. And they've got a couple of big signings to come, I think, because you look at the fact that they've managed to get rid of Rongier, Quentin Merlin, who've both gone to Rennes this weekend, so they're getting in a bit of extra money. Chancellor Mbemba's gone. He was earning big wages too. So they can make a big impact, I think, in the transfer window in August. What they need to be, though, is ready to go at the start of August. That's De Zerbi's aim, and that's really his duty, to get them ready to go, because PSG, and you talked about them, we were talking about it earlier, Danny, playing Tottenham in the Super Cup. It's a great opportunity for Tottenham because, of course, they've been playing the longest season ever to the absolute end. They played every game it was possible to play last season, if we're including the Club World Cup in last season, which I think we kind of have to, because last season never really ended. So I don't see how PSG can be in peak condition until mid-September, October. I think if you're Marseille, you've got to go out there with the attitude, let's smash as many points as we possibly can.
And see where it takes us. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it doesn't mean they're going to win the league. No one's saying that. But just to put some pressure on PSG domestically, that'd be the best possible thing for the competition.
Listen, thank you very, very much indeed. Let's get back now to the World Match Play darts in Blackpool, where we may or may not be getting our last update of the evening. Is that right, Mark Wilson?
Well, it could be going a little bit longer because Stephen Bunting is level with Ryan Joyce, 8 legs apiece. In fact, as we speak, Bunting has just gone 9-8 up. He was 8-4 in front, really off 4 on the spin, but then he missed a load of doubles. That allowed Joyce back into it. Joyce himself has just missed a dart to go 9-8 up. It is a race to 10, but you've got to win by 2 clear legs. So if Bunting wins the next leg, he's through. If he doesn't, we go to a tiebreaker. It is live over on talkSPORT 2 with Ian Danter and Paul Nicholson. It's Bunting 9, Joyce 8.
Yeah, fantastic. I thought maybe that game was going to come to an end. I'm kind of half watching it out of the corner of my eye, but that was a great comeback. And now, of course, it'll go a bit further. You can listen to it over on talkSPORT 2, or we'll get the final result to you sometime in the next section, a section where Uma Gurav will join us once again to talk about everything that's been happening in the Euros for women, including some pretty nasty stuff away from the football, the sort of thing that we didn't want to have to report on, but we will report on it, because until we get to the bottom of online abuse, we shouldn't rest, should we? That's next. Welcome back to Trans-Europe Express. Now, over there in Switzerland, the Women's Euros has been, we just had a very exciting and often a very, very close round of quarter-finals. To review those and to preview the semi-final, but also to talk about the big breaking story, I'm delighted to join, as always, on this subject, Uma Gurav. Good evening, Uma.
Good evening. How are you?
Really good. Now, Uma, I've really enjoyed your contributions to Trans-Europe Express over the last few weeks, because they've been so enthusiastic about everything that's going on. So it's kind of heartbreaking that we have to bring a very negative story, but you'll report on it for us, I know, with your usual thoroughness. Jess Carter, who plays for Gotham FC in England, who should be looking forward to gaining her 50th cap in the semi-final at some stage, has now had to deal with the scourge of online abuse and online racism. Tell us how that story's come to light and is unfolding.
Yeah, and you know what, I have to start by saying that it is just disappointing and heartbreaking that we're still having to talk about stories like this in 2025, and with the situation that football is in, we just shouldn't be having to discuss these things. But like you say, unfortunately, Jess Carter has released a statement today revealing that she's been the target of a lot of racist abuse during the tournament. And as a result of that, the Lionesses have also said that they're going to stop their anti-racism gesture of taking the knee before matches, because they're basically saying that it's pretty clear that as a gesture it's not getting through to the people that this message needs to get through to. She's still being targeted across social media. And Lucy Bronze has spoken in a press conference about this as well. The Lionesses have never said that they don't want to be criticised. They're just saying it's completely unacceptable, as it is, for them to be targeted because of their race or any other protected characteristic like that. And
sure.
Jess Carter, you know, she's an absolutely brilliant player. She really is. And the fact that she maybe has had a couple of difficult performances, as all of the Lionesses have, does not mean it is in any way okay that she's being targeted for this. And I think it's disappointing. The police have been called in to hopefully kind of track down, you know, the people responsible for this. And actually, Courtney Sweetman-Kirk, our reporter out in Zurich, she spoke to Alex Greenwood earlier about this, and I think our listeners can hear what was said about that.
Alex Greenwood, thank you for joining us. We're going to start, unfortunately, with the news about Jess Carter, the horrific abuse that she's faced. Obviously, we've seen the statement that, you know, the Lionesses have put out, and, you know, just from perspective, how are you guys sort of dealing with it in the camp?
I think, first of all, showing support to Jess. I think our statement is as clear as it's going to be. We just don't stand for that. It's something that we don't think's right as a team. We've made so much progression and been able to make so much change, and we hope that making this statement as powerfully as we can, that brings more change and more people listening to know that this is just unacceptable.
Just the decision behind not taking the knee, is that because you feel that symbolism isn't achieving anything and you want to try and progress forward to try and obviously eradicate racism from the game?
Yeah, I think I would say so. I think it's maybe a feeling it's lost its power. It was something that we thought about yesterday, we spoke about as a team. Again, it's something that we agreed to do, and we think it sends out a message that it's no longer delivering the message that we would like it to receive. So we've agreed not to take the knee from this game and for the future until something changes.
Yeah, sorry, please, tell us both the voices we're listening to there.
I was just going to say, I think, you know, and it's hard listening to the players speak about this, but I just think it's important to say that the one thing that needs to come out of this, I think, as listeners, that we need to understand is that the message here is that we need to get through to social media companies now, because racism
I was about thank you. I was about to make exactly the same point. You can have rhetoric about education. You can have all the gestures that you like, including very, very heartfelt ones like the taking of the knee. But until the social media company, nobody is a greater advocate for free speech than me. Right? I really am a libertarian about this stuff, but it has to be free speech with consequence. If you break the laws of countries, and at the moment it's a wild west still. I mean, 25, 30 years after the internet started, we have no real sanction for people who go beyond the limit and indeed are breaking the law in countries where these things are broadcast. And the social media companies, whether they like it or not, and of course they don't like it, because it would involve for them more work and less profit, they have to be brought to book somehow. I'm not a politician, I don't know how that would be, but Umar, I agree with you 100%. Look, the football goes on, and we hope that the people who perpetrated at least some of these offences against Jess Carter will be hunted down by the authorities. Andy, I know you want to have your say, please.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope so. Obviously, I mean, what is so sad about it is not acceptable in any context. But it's been an amazing weekend and a bit of quarterfinals, which has really set this Euros up for a brilliant conclusion.
Oh, it's been absolutely fantastic. I was saying yesterday, I think these quarterfinals have been the best set of quarterfinals I've ever watched in my life, just in terms of the drama. Yeah. I think the quality at times has been outstanding. At times it's been crazy. I think some of the penalty shootouts we've seen have been so entertaining to watch. Not perhaps if, as an England fan, when I was sitting behind the goal in that England match, my heart was in my mouth. It was, most terrifying experience of my life. But just as a fan, I think it's been so enjoyable to watch. And like you say, I hope that something is done about this, because this tournament should be enjoyed by not only the fans but by the players. I actually spoke to Alex Greenwood not too long ago about the experience of being a player at these tournaments, and she said the one thing we have to remember is we're getting to play for our country in an amazing tournament, represent our nation, and we should be able to enjoy it. So, like you say, I hope that something is done, but I also hope that Jess Carter is able to, kind of be supported, and we'll see whether or not this affects the squad decisions, because, of course, Serena Wiegmann, I think, will be making sure that she prioritises Jess Carter's well-being first and foremost, and whether that means that perhaps, she makes the decision not to play her for the Italy match, we will see, but I'm sure whatever decision she takes will be the right one.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty more to go in this tournament for England, isn't there? And I think in the way that those quarterfinals have split, not just getting past Sweden, who are an extremely strong opponent, as we've seen, but Norway going out in the other quarterfinal in that half. So England face Italy, and in the other half of the draw, you've got this titanic battle between Spain, who look the best team at the tournament so far by some distance, I would say, and Germany, who pulled a rabbit out of a hat in getting past France last night.
It was so very German, the whole thing.
It really was, and it sort of makes you think, you just start to think, is this possibly Germany's tournament? Because they've had 2 red cards now. They've had some remarkable moments where you just think they should not be in this tournament anymore. How France didn't put the game to bed earlier on in that game, I do not understand.
It was nuts.
But it was nuts, and full credit to their keeper, Ann-Katrin Berger. What a remarkable woman she is. I mean, that save when it looked like they were going to score an own goal, I've never seen anything like it. And I think for Germany, that just shows you the kind of team they are. They're not at their best at this tournament. They lost their captain in the first game through an MCL injury. They've now suffered 2 red cards. One of their main players, Shuka Niskin, suffered 2 yellow cards, so she'll be missing the semi-finals. I think all the odds are stacked against Germany, and yet I still have this inkling that they might be able to pull something off against Spain. I think they have the pace. Spain's defence hasn't been as strong as it normally is. They have conceded goals. Switzerland, I think, even frustrated them, and I was looking at Spain and thinking, actually, this is the first time we've really seen this Spain team quite rattled, and I think if Germany can do that, they could certainly do it with 10 players. If they can do it with 11, I actually think, I'm not saying it's going to be a shock of the tournament, but I'm not sure that Spain are going to make it to the finals after all.
Uma, you are setting up in our minds an England-Germany final. Thank you. Thank you so much. As if we're not scarred enough by these blinking things over the years in every form of football. Listen, Uma, thank you for that very serious report about Jess Carter. I hope it's not spoiling your enjoyment of the tournament, which has been reflected in your brilliant reports to us over the weeks. We'll get back to you next week, hopefully, maybe after an England triumph. Why don't we get back to the darts? One more time, Mark Wilson.
Yeah, it's ended here. Stephen Bunting safely through to the last 16. He's beaten Ryan Joyce 10-8. Had a bit of a scare at the end, but he sets up a magical tie with Gary Anderson in the second round. A final round of 32 games tomorrow sees Dobie, Price, Van Gerwen and Ross Smith all in action. That's on talkSPORT 2 tomorrow night from 7 o'clock.
Yeah, you're listening to talkSPORT, and of course Trans Europe Express. Still tons to get through in the final hour of the show, including we'll be going to South America to Tim Vickery. Keep listening.
The Ryder Cup. Unique, euphoric, unanimously loved. Here's the history and some of the key numbers behind the contest that grips the world of golf and beyond like no other. The first edition was held in 1927, where a Great Britain team arrived by boat to play in Massachusetts at the Worcester Country Club. Originally, the competition comprised of 4 foursomes and 8 singles, with 4 balls not introduced until 1963. In the first 22 editions, when it was just Brits and Irish against the US, America only lost 3. So, in 1979, in came the rest of Europe, including the future 5-time Ryder Cup winner, Seve Ballesteros. Since Team Europe was established, the head-to-head reads Europe 13, USA 9. Home advantage is a big deal. Europe's last away win was the miracle at Medina in 2012, and America hasn't won on European soil since '93 at the Belfry. It's accepted that both teams tailor their home courses to suit their own players. For example, in Paris in 2018, Thomas Bjorn asked for the rough to be kept extra long beyond the green to target the big booming American drives. 10 years earlier, Paul Azinger did the opposite, and the Valhalla rough was trimmed right down. On both occasions, the home side were resounding winners. So what about the money? The most recent Ryder Cup in Rome drew in a record 271,000 spectators and boosted the Italian economy by €262 million. In the US, the PGA America TV deal with NBC is worth $440 million. But no Ryder Cup revenue has ever gone directly to individual players. That's until now. In 2025, for the first time ever, the US team will each receive a fee for playing in New York. Of course, in Rome, legend has it Patrick Cantley refused to wear his cap because he wasn't being paid to wear it, though he insisted it simply didn't fit. Either way, Team Europe have made it clear they're more than happy to keep playing for the sheer thrill, joy and prestige of the Ryder Cup.
Yeah, welcome back, each and every one of you, to the third and final hour of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. It's an hour that's going to be packed with stuff that I hope you're going to find both interesting and entertaining. During the course of the next 60 minutes, I guess, 55 minutes, Andy Brassell and me, Danny Kelly, will be talking to Tim Vickers about everything that's been happening in South America. We'll also have, all kinds of updates from Andy where leagues have started, and we'll be looking at the Champions League and Europa League and Europa Conference qualifiers. Some big teams already taking part, some more big teams joining in, and a huge game here on the island of Ireland. All of that coming up in what should be an absolutely densely packed 60 minutes of radio. Welcome one, welcome all, welcome back to Trans Europe Express. Yes, and of course 11 o'clock in our normal slot means it's time to go over to South America, where we'll join Tim Vickery. Good evening, Tim.
Evening, gentlemen. I'm just going through some gentle limbering exercises, some stretches, preparing to come into the studio this time next week. And while I'm doing that, I'm just trying to assimilate that news. That was the first I've heard of it, about the state of health of Paul Gascoigne. Danny, we are very, very privileged because for a while, you know, he was our little secret. Going into that 1990 World Cup, I think all of us at White Hart Lane, we kind of knew that we were watching what was possibly the best player in the world for an all-too brief moment. But for all of that pleasure that he gave us, let's hope that he pulls through this one and has many, many extremely happy years ahead of him.
Sorry, Tim, I'm not a medical person, but the reports we're getting, if you can judge it by the various kinds of wards in which he's been treated, is that they seem to have stabilised him. That's the word they're using. He's in a stable condition and has been moved from intensive to acute. Now, we all know there's many a slip between cup and lip, but all we can do is hope and pray for him and wish him every recovery. Apart from watching him play for Spurs in England, I also had the interesting, fantastic, and sometimes very scary experience of being around Paul Gascoigne at the height of his fame and infamy, if you like, due to my friendship with one or two of his friends as well. All I can do in that department is just, you know, he is an extraordinary human being. For all his flaws, he's an extraordinary, extraordinary man. And I just hope he gets better very, very soon. Tim, what's the first story you want to bring to our attention?
I think really the Copa America, or the Women's Copa America, which is underway in Ecuador at the moment, builds to a final on August the 2nd. And it's a sad comparison that I have to make between this and the Euros going on in Switzerland, because these games in Ecuador, a lot of them are taking place in front of like 200, 300 fans. The comparison is, there's just this chasm between the development of women's football on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, there is a feeling, I think, in general here with women's football, that quite a lot of people are doing it because they have to do it, without real conviction. You wonder if CONMEBOL, the South American UEFA equivalent, really have their heart in this competition, badly publicised and so on. And we hear similar things about the club game, you know, that some clubs are doing it really as kind of lip service and as an obligation rather than a mission. But there also are huge structural problems here compared with Europe. When you look at Europe, I mean, the development of the game is amazing, and some of that has to do with the dynamic of competition. I think of Spain or even England. What were they 20, 25, 30 years ago in this sport? They were nothing. You know, in Europe it was like Scandinavia and Germany. They were the countries that were out of the blocks quicker. But there's been this extraordinary dynamic of competition, and one side pushes the other and so on. In South America, we haven't had any of that, really, because, and this is a similar story to the one I tell you about club football, men's club football in South America, really because Brazil are so dominant. And in the women's game, some of the other countries in South America, they don't have what they have in the men's game, which is the force of tradition, the force of history and tradition. The way it's structured is 2 groups of 5. The top 2 will qualify for the semi-finals. We've had two rounds. Some teams have played 3, but most have played 2. Brazil are 100% in their group. Argentina are 100% in their group. 2 narrow victories. But possibly the best sides, apart from Brazil, don't include Argentina. Certainly they include Colombia and also maybe Venezuela, who are in the same group. It's Brazil, Venezuela and Colombia all together. So either Venezuela or Colombia are going to miss out on the semi-finals. Why Venezuela and Colombia? I think it has a lot to do with geographic proximity to the United States and the fact that women's football was legitimised in the States before it was in the south of South America. So that's what I suspect. But we've got the problem here with the Brazilian league cannibalising the other leagues. So it's hard to have a strong league in Colombia because Brazil poaches all the best players, as it does from all the neighbouring countries. So I do worry about the future of women's football in South America. There are lots of real heroes involved in this game, but looking at the comparison between the success in Europe and I wouldn't call it failure, but nowhere near success in South America, it really does make you worry.
Tim, I wanted to talk to you about Neymar's week because it's been an interesting one for him. Now, we talked earlier in the programme about Marcus Rashford and how there's so much will for him to get back to his best. And sometimes it's easy to get a bit muddled and try and work out what is logical and what is just what we want and what we would love to happen. And I wanted to ask you that about Neymar. Obviously, age-wise, he's a little bit further down the line, but he's had a fascinating week, scores this brilliant goal, which I'm sure everyone listening has heard, has seen seen already online. He had that lovely bit of footage where he nutmegged his oldest son, which I think we all really enjoyed as well in that training session. And there's an interesting little thing on socials tonight where Neymar put up a picture of he's been sent the new PSG shirt for next season with his name on the back and with one for each of his family, like his wife and his kids and his dad and all that, which is lovely. And I think really gives us a window into the fact that there are parts of European football, I think there's a very different view of him in England to elsewhere, where he's seen as a bit of a party animal and a show-off who doesn't really care about football that much. But he's thought of so differently in Brazil and so differently by all the people who've worked with him. So I guess let's talk a little bit about the difference between those different perceptions. And is this a possibility of the next great bit of Neymar, or is it another false dawn?
Too early to say, I think, although one or two encouraging signs. Yeah, Neymar is one of those people who he communicates extremely well with his demographic and extremely badly with everyone else. It is striking how popular he is with most of his teammates. The Brazil squad, I think, would welcome him back with absolutely open arms. And he does have this idol status. The man himself is seen as a giver, as someone who wants to give for the collective benefit. But he can't resist. And I've only spoken to him once, and it was a long time ago, but it was absolutely clear in my mind that for him it all went together. The idea of being a star on the football field was intrinsically linked to the idea of entering into this golden paradise world of celebrities. And the two things were linked. And for a long time, I think one doesn't necessarily hamper the other. But there are things that we do, as all of us know from sad experience, you can do at 23 that you can't do at 33. So you do wonder. The hope is that he's got a year to go now to the World Cup, that he will really knuckle down in a way that the great original Ronaldo knuckled down in the build-up to the 2002 World Cup, and then never knuckled down again afterwards. In midweek against the then leaders of the Brazilian Championship, Flamengo, he scored the only goal of the game. It was an excellent goal. They ended up putting him as a kind of false nine. He scored a goal when he turned two defenders and put the ball in the net. Didn't do a great deal else, but you're seeing flashes. And then yesterday, they were playing a small, newly promoted side called Mirassol, his club, Santos, and they got done completely. They lost 3-0. So one swallow and all the rest of it. But there's just a first little encouraging sign. I tend to the view that there might still be something there for the national side. There could be more chapters to be written. But I think it's unlikely that they'll be in this centre-forward position that he played the last few minutes and the position from where he won that game against Flamengo. I don't quite see him doing it there against elite defenders, just because I think he's lost that little bit of pace. I would imagine him playing a little bit deeper. The former Brazil coach, Chichu, took him to 2 World Cups, said that Neymar was both bow and arrow. I would have thought that now, at this stage, he will be more bow than arrow. But it's nice to see him scoring a good goal, picking up some confidence. But I think we're going to need to see, and the coach, Ancelotti, the Brazil coach, will want to see more consistency before we talk about him making an impact on the World Cup next year.
Tim, I know you've got a multiplicity, a plethora of stories for us, but I'm going to move on because of the pressure of time to one that I want to talk about with you. It is, of course, the 75th anniversary of one of the most amazing, important, and sort of rippling out from it football match in the history of the game when Uruguay, tiny Uruguay, beat Brazil in the 1950 World Cup final in Brazil. Tell us. I mean, I'm sure it's being talked about a lot in Brazil, and perhaps still in hushed tones, and with people requiring psychological support.
Yeah, it was July the 16th, so the 75th anniversary was in midweek. Brazil has been obsessed with this game. You know, there's probably been more written about it from the Brazilian side than there has been from the Uruguayan side. You can buy books in Brazil that go through the game, move by move by move by move. If I had a time travel, if I could go back to any one game of football, it might well be this one, because I think football has rarely meant as much as it did. Brazil built the stadium, the Maracanã, the biggest stadium in the world. They made sure that the official capacity was bigger than Hampden Park. You know, it was full of that kind of megalomania, and they built it in order to win the World Cup. And it was all part of Brazil emerging as this new great southern power. They proclaimed themselves, or the mayor of Rio proclaimed them world champions before the national anthems. The gods of football never liked this kind of thing.
They do not.
Remember that Uruguay had never lost a World Cup game. And from and Uruguay in a warm-up game, when they didn't even have a coach, beat Brazil. So from the perspective of a month before the World Cup, Uruguay's win wasn't a shock. It was a shock from the perspective of what happened during the World Cup, because Brazil, after an uneasy start, Brazil were just rolling over their opponents, beating them 7-1 and 6-0 and so on. And Uruguay was scraping past. So Uruguay went into the game as real underdogs and played a magnificent match. When the winger, Gizia, who scored the decisive goal, because Uruguay had to win. A draw, it was played on a group format, so a draw was Brazil's. Uruguay won coming from behind 2-1, and Gizia, who scored the goal, he died on July the 16th. He died on the anniversary of scoring that goal. The gods of football once more. I had the opportunity many years ago to get to know a couple of the Brazilians who played in this game, from that wonderful inside forward line, Zizinho and Jair. And they could never forget it. They really couldn't. Zizinho would have nightmares about it. He would dream of this game. But the thing that I like so much about it is that it meant so much. And the Brazilians were tarred as failures and losers and weaklings forevermore. But the Uruguay side knew that they had beaten a wonderful, wonderful team. And it forged a bond between them. And I think it's one of the nicest things I've ever heard about football. The players, they would often have get-togethers, because there was so much mutual respect. It was almost like, you know, there's a line from a Wilfred Owen World War I poem. I am the enemy you killed, my friend. You know, they're meeting, a German and English soldier are meeting each other in the afterlife, you know. Yeah. I am the enemy you killed, my friend, you know. And that 1950 World Cup, there was a little bit of that in it. In the heat of the sporting battle, thankfully with no one losing their lives, there was forged such a respect. The strength, the power of the occasion forged such a respect that there were lifelong bonds between the players of Uruguay and the players of Brazil. And that's one of the best stories I think football can ever tell.
Tim, that's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Tim Vickery there, reporting live from South America. What a contribution he makes every week on here. Just to finish that off as well, I can't imagine there's ever been a World Cup final where the disparity between the populations of the two countries was so vast. And the story goes, and I don't know whether it's true, is that when the cup arrived back in the capital of Uruguay, Montevideo, it was greeted by half the population, 2.5 million people, and the Uruguayan president, with the trophy in front of him, said, "Other countries have their history, we have our football." Yeah, you're listening to talkSPORT and, of course, to Trans Europe Express with me, Danny Kelly, and him, Andy Brassell. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about the amazing transfer splurge that Galatasaray, the current champions and sometimes perennial champions of Turkey, have been on. But our club focus tonight for the next 6 or 7 minutes is on their rivals, Fenerbahce, who haven't won the title for 11 years. Now, that, if you're in what is essentially a two-horse race, though Besiktas and others may have something to say about that, is quite incredible. So, Andy, and we know with the jeweler's eyepiece with which you regard Turkish football, this is an incredibly important transfer window and time for Fenerbahce. First and foremost, they are as active as Gala in the transfer window.
Yeah, they are, and they've hit hard so far. If you think of the way that last season ended, they needed to, not just finishing a mile off the top, but remember that last home game where it was almost empty, the Sukuru Saracoğlu, where there were protests outside against the club, where inside there were people with banners in favour of Ismail Kartal, the previous coach before Jose Mourinho, the one who finished with 99 points, as you said, and didn't win the Super League. So there was a lot of pressure on the club to really come out of the blocks, not only to protect Mourinho, but most importantly, as any board member in the history of football will tell you, to protect themselves. That is the main thing. It was past the point where Mourinho could act as a human shield for them, and a lot of the criticism, as we said, was focused on the club rather than Mourinho himself. So he's escaped that mostly unscathed. But they've re-upped with real intent. Now, John Duran is a huge signing. Remember, some of the biggest clubs in the world wanted him less than a year ago. He has come to Fenerbahce for this year. A few little murmurs as he didn't turn up to training on time this week, but he has finally presented himself. John McGinn might have had a word about that on social media in the week.
I saw that.
Not alone in the Villa camp in thinking that, I guess. But some other good news for them with Milan Skriniar looking like he'll sign permanently from PSG. He made a big impact in the second half of last season on loan. Another expensive deal from PSG that looks like it'll be happening is that of Marco Asensio, who, of course, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say he was one of the best players in the Premier League in the second half of last season. So these are real statements of intent by Fenerbahce. And like I said, I think it goes beyond Mourinho, really, because, of course, Mourinho was a big statement in himself last season. It didn't work in a sporting sense, I think it's fair to say. But in terms of giving Fenerbahce global projection, of course it worked. You know, there are more eyes on Fenerbahce
every press conference, Mourinho says something that went, smashing around the world. Whether it was about corruption in Turkish football, whether it was about the standard of play, or whatever it was, all eyes were on the club.
Yeah, that's right. He turned Fenerbahce's concerns and grumbles into global matters rather than simply Turkish matters. So it definitely worked for them in that sense. I would still be really surprised if he went to the term of his contract. Bear in mind, he's going into the second season of a 3-season deal.
Infamously, second season, yeah.
Yeah, it's very expensive. And sooner or later, they're going to have to trim stuff to go in towards the playing budget. And you do wonder, as they assemble what they hope will be a truly superstar team, traditionally, does a more low-key coach work better with that? I mean, really, if you look at Mourinho, more stars means more stars to fall out with, really, doesn't it? I mean, that's traditionally how it works, and especially
I suppose you've got to argue that they are importing a lot of talent into the club. I suppose that would be the counter argument. You're right. Mourinho is not afraid to confront very famous and important, to use the modern parlance, footballers. And I mentioned that stat. Is 11 years without the title. These things happen. Manchester United are going through a similar drought, you could argue, and all the rest of that. But that's only the tip of an iceberg in Turkey, because lots of countries are mad about football, but the Turkish obsession with the game The fact that Fenerbahce are historic, and the fact that when I used to live in London when I had more hair, my barber used to take a process that should take 15 minutes to trim my barnet. Used to take an hour and a quarter because he knew me and knew what I did for a living, while he explained to me why Fenerbahce were the biggest club in the world, why Galatasaray weren't worth wiping off the sole of your shoe, and how next year was the year that Fenerbahce were going to win the Champions League. The pressure on Fenerbahce is local rivalry, a football-mad country, and a global diaspora that expects them to do well.
Yeah, it is. And look, I see Fenerbahce shirts in the street all the time.
Absolutely.
I don't live in London full-time anymore. I see them in Newcastle. I passed one the other day. They are an enormous club with so much support everywhere. And eventually that's going to require more daring football. For the moment, what it requires is getting back in the Champions League. Now, look, they go in at the third qualifying round. They were unlucky to go out to Lille at that stage last year. And, of course, Lille went on to do good things in the Champions League, having been pushed to the limit by Fenerbahce, particularly in the return leg in Istanbul. And this season, I said at this point last season, there are no excuses for not winning the league. And I still stand by that, actually. You can't be sitting there and saying it's a conspiracy, we're the best team in this league and everyone knows it, when you finish miles off the top, when you're running a wage bill that would make a statue weep. But this time, in terms of qualifying for the Champions League, they know that Galatasaray are in it. They were kind of lucky in that Galatasaray went out in disastrously for them in a sporting sense in the playoff round last year. This time, they have to make it. They have to make it to the group stage of the Champions League.
Listen, fascinating, Andy, and we'll keep a very close eye on Fenerbahce, because you could argue that this plethora, this blizzard of transfers incoming is either at Jose Mourinho's behest, or is the club future-proofing itself for a Mourinho-less time further down the line. When we come back in a second, we'll be bringing you all the news from the Champions League qualifiers, the Europa League qualifiers and the conference qualifiers. Some big clubs already involved and some more coming down the pipeline very soon. European football, my friends, is back. Yeah, as I said there before the break, European football, whether we like it or not, is back. The Club World Cup has barely finished, involving a load of teams that qualified by doing well in UEFA competitions, and now the UEFA competitions and the season that never ends have kicked back in. Andy, let's start with the Champions League qualifiers. We'll talk about the British and Irish teams in just a second, but one or two famous names from the past through a tricky opening qualifiers, including Malmö and the artist formerly known as Steaua Bucharest.
So, yeah, a former finalist and a former winner of the competition, both going in at the first qualifying round.
Amazing, isn't it?
That tells you not just where they are at the moment, but I guess like where the current financial setup of European football is. That there's such a difference between, say, the Premier League and the Swedish Allsvenskan or the Romanian Liga. It's remarkable, really. I mean, Malmö coasted through fairly easily against Georgian opposition. FCSB, who were Steaua Bucharest, as you say, extraordinary for them, really. They got through 4-3 on aggregate against Interescaldes. Interescaldes, if you haven't heard of them, are from Andorra, and they managed to lose the second leg in Andorra, which
wow.
I guess really, if you were Luis Enrique, you would be saying, "Oh, well, that was good. It was a learning curve, and we still got through," which is, of course, what he said after the quarter-final against Aston Villa last year. I'm not sure if you'd be brave enough to say that if you're coming out of the FCSB dressing room afterwards, but they're both still in it. As you said earlier, some big names from the past as well coming in this round, the second round, which we go straight into this week. Remember, the first round started while the Club World Cup was still going on, if we're talking about that issue of football never really stopping. This week, we've got Paphos, who are the champions from Cyprus, drew 2-2 against AFC Wimbledon, in case you wondered, in their first prep game a couple of weeks ago. We've got Dynamo Kiev coming in, who were the unbeaten champions of Ukraine last year, and Crvena Zvezda, Red Star Belgrade. Elsewhere, we've got an absolutely huge game in the Europa League, if we're talking about these big games. In the second round of qualifying in the Europa League, Shakhtar versus Besiktas. Yes, that's Arda Turan, the new coach of Shakhtar, versus Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, which should be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, you can tell me more about some of the other ones. I think I should, because it was something I've talked a lot about on H&J, but also here on Trans Europe Express, I should give you the final outcome of the game, the tie between Shelbourne and Linfield, because it's such a rare thing that teams from north and south of the border here in Ireland play each other. Now, Andy, I've got to be honest with you. This should normally have been back page news and a gigantic story. It is our job to report the truth, though, not the fantasy. It's been an extraordinary week for sport in Ireland. You had the golf, the British Open, being played in Royal Portrush, so that the days when these ties were being played, the great golf players from all over the world were arriving in Ireland. Rory McIlroy was playing his practice rounds, etc., etc. You had the British and Irish Lions building up to the first Test victory, as it turned out to be against Australia. And if I might be so bold, the British and Irish Lions this time round is Ireland's team with a few English and Scottish excellent players bolted into it. And thirdly, we were building up to the All-Ireland hurling final, which is in many ways the biggest sporting event in Ireland every year. 82,000 today at Croke Park to see Tipperary make it one of the great second half comebacks to beat Cork losing for the second year running. The result of that is that, I've got to be honest, Linfield and Shelbourne, while of huge interest to me, were struggling to make the back pages, which is a shame for soccer in this country that I happen to live in. In the end, Shelbourne beat Linfield by a goal to nil in Tolka Park in Dublin. Then in the return tie this week, they got a goal after 20 minutes, Shelbourne, through Ali Coote, which meant they were 2-0 up. And Linfield, who, don't forget, are not even started their season, whereas Shelbourne are in the middle of theirs, albeit not a very successful season following their title win last season. Linfield did get a goal back through Chris Shields. The game was marred by two things. One, controversy. There was a red card for a Linfield player, and a quite extraordinary goal disallowed. McInroy got what looked like the clincher for Shelbourne. I still don't understand why it was disallowed. The officials came up with offside, they said. I couldn't see anybody in a Shelbourne shirt who was remotely offside in the move. I think the officials got it wrong and couldn't go back on the decision. I would say the final thing, and one other reason why the build-up to the game was slightly awkward, is that the second leg, of course, was taking place in the middle of the Unionist marching season in the north, which can often cause, a great deal of tension. And there was indeed some sectarian chanting from the home fans in Belfast. I feel the need to report that, just as we would exactly the same sort of thing in any game of football in any part of Europe as we go on. So what started out as being hopefully a huge and important tie, overshadowed by other sporting events, but in the end, I thought a predictable win for Shelbourne, not because they're particularly better than Linfield at the moment, but because they're just more battle-hardened. And so Shelbourne go through to the next round. What else?
The other thing we have to say, Danny, for Linfield, as well as with New Saints, who went out an extra time away at Skendir in North Macedonia, is that they've got an opportunity for have a go at having
yes,
a go
they get parachuted into the conference, don't they?
So that still happens. So Europa League qualifiers. After that, it would be conference qualifiers. Of course, remember New Saints that they got around further in last season's qualifiers, but did end up in the Conference League playing their games at home at Shrewsbury. Which was quite an interesting little twist. But look, the other thing that's happening before these games, we said there's no pause, and there isn't, I suppose, with these games on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday this week for the second round. But there is kind of a pause tomorrow, because tomorrow at UEFA headquarters in Nyon, we've got the draw for the third qualifying round. And so I feel I've got to talk you through the bigger teams that are dropping in, or the bigger clubs that are dropping in at the third and qualifying round and the playoff round as well. So, look, the ones who drop in at the third qualifying round, this is where it starts getting really big. We talked about Fenerbahce. They're in at the third qualifying round, so they're in tomorrow's draw. We've got Nice. We've got Feyenoord, who just spent 10 million plus on a player today. We've got Benfica. They're looking to buy Richard Rios from Palmeiras this weekend, so they're spending a lot of money as well. Club Brugge, who won the Super Cup, as we might come on to in Belgium today, they are coming in at the third qualifying round. The ones that come in at the playoff round, we get champions of the leagues that are below the top bracket. So Celtic are in at the playoff round. Basel, who won the Swiss Super League for the first time in 10 years and promptly lost their coach, Fabio Celestini, who went to Russia. They're in. Sturm Graz, they're in the playoff round. And our pals Bodo Glimt, they're in at the playoff round as well. So really interesting to see how it's going to pan out over the next couple of weeks.
And, as I reported at the end of the last rounds of qualifiers and things, it is really very hard to overestimate how important these games are to clubs. Of course, you're going to talk about the glory of qualifying for group stages and all the rest of it. But as I said, watching Shamrock Rovers not quite make the group stages, they still made enough money in last season's qualifiers to mean that they will completely dominate Irish football unless something weird happens for the next 5 seasons. Indeed, they are running away with the title as I speak. And some of those clubs you mentioned there, and we've seen, for instance, what being in Europe has done for Bodo Glimt, how it has cemented their domination of Norwegian football. So you've got huge clubs like Benfica who can't afford not to be in it, and other clubs that you mentioned there for whom being in it just for one season or even doing well in the qualifiers can be an existence-altering event.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Danny. And you look at, I guess, the transfer window that you can't do, if you're sensible, until you've secured the Champions League bounty. But can you afford, I suppose, to A, not have the players you really need for those qualifiers, and B, leave it to the last 5 days of the transfer window to do your business? I suppose Benfica are kind of in that situation at the moment. We talk about Fenerbahce are not even thinking about that. They're like, okay, let's go big. and we're going to get there. But we talked about Benfica and signing Richard Rios. Of course, in the other direction has gone Okan Kökçü, who's gone to Besiktas, who we might touch on in a second. But they've got to decide whether they're going to go all the way for João Felix. Now, of course, they might end up loaning him from Chelsea. That feels like a possibility to me if they don't have to deal with the transfer fee bit of it. But they've got to come near his wages. Now, dare they do that before the third qualifying round? I mean, it's a really big question, isn't it? And it's a big question for lots of these clubs. Now, we talked about the effect of what going out of Europe might mean at this stage of this season. Now, we talked about that tie between Turan and Solskjaer, Shakhtar and Besiktas. That feels like a biggie for one of those. Either of those, I think, would be, if they get to the groups, would be one of the favourites to win the Europa League.
Where will the Shakhtar home game take place, Andy?
It's Krakow in Poland this week. Yeah. So they've signed a deal which has got potential to keep going if they make it. You often have Ukrainian clubs play their qualifiers in a different place that they end up playing the group game. So we have to wait and see if they get as far as the groups. Of course, they've got 3 rounds to get through if they want to get to the groups of the Europa League. But either of those teams would be favourites. Both of those clubs have spent a lot of money on players. You look at Besiktas in this window, and of course we talked about Okan Kökçü. They've spent 30 million euros on him. I mean, you don't do that to not get in the Europa League. So obviously we can say there's the possibility of the Conference League, and again, either of those clubs would be among the favourites for it. But in terms of Besiktas, they're trying to be rivals, really meaningful rivals this season with Galatasaray and Fenerbahce. You've seen that with the sort of transfers they're making. And Shakhtar, as we saw with the Usyk flight last night, are really trying to fly the flag for Ukraine. And they're bringing in Brazilians in more expensive and greater volumes than they were at the start of the full war.
I think you've answered your question my question by implication. If I gave you all the games taking place Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday across the continent, Andy, which one would you go to?
I'm staying in Thursday night. Let's put it that way.
All right. Listen, thank you very, very much indeed. Andy Brassell there, who will take us through to midnight here on Trans-Europe Express by taking us through around the leagues, as we always do, where teams are either actually starting with competitive matches, the Super Cup in Belgium, we'll talk about that in a second, or after making the final touches to their squads for leagues that are now not just some idealistic thing in the near future, but actually upon us. You're listening to Trans-Europe Express. Yeah, just about 10 minutes to go here on this edition of Trans Europe Express. Thank you for being with us. As I often say, we know you could be doing almost anything at this time of night better, including sleeping, get ready for you to go to work or school or whatever it is you're doing. So we appreciate each and every one of you who listen to me, Danny Kelly, and him, Andy Brassell. Andy, let's get into then some of the leagues, what's going on in some of the leagues that we haven't yet touched on. And as I said, competitive football back in some places in Europe once again. Look, we talked about it a lot, Andy, but it really is nuts now that the game just doesn't have a rest for the footballers. You've got these extra club competitions, you've got commercial tours to far-flung parts of the world, which passes a pre-season, and the seasons get earlier and earlier and earlier. Now, I'm not blaming Belgium, because it's a problem in every single footballing country in the world, but the Belgian Super Cup has happened.
Well, the Super Cup has to happen in July if your season's going to start quite shortly after that.
Sure.
So that's where we are, of course. Union Saint-Gilloise, remarkably, are the champions, playing Club Brugge, who had kept them from being the champions for the previous 3 years. So that they faced each other in the Super Cup. An early lead for Union in this, but Club Brugge came back. The inevitable Hans Vanaken scoring the winner. A bit of pressure at the end for Union, but Club Brugge held out to win the first trophy of the Belgian season. And Club Brugge feel like they want to come back and come back big this season. Now, a few little changes, of course. Every summer, you're going to have Union Saint-Gilloise losing players, and some of the players they've lost. The team you could compile from the players they've lost over the last 5 or 6 years, and I might think of, say, Cameron Puertas, who went off to the Middle East, but you think Boniface is in there, Van Zier's in there, Undav's in there. So many great players, a lot of them forwards, it has to be said. Promise David has stayed so far, which is a big deal for them in terms of forwards. We'll see if that works out with about a month and a half of the transfer window still to go for them. Of course, it'll be interesting seeing them have a pop at the Champions League this season. But look, I think to see if they're able to maintain, I think will be really interesting. Look, even as champions, they're not favourites for the Belgian Championship again, and nor should they be, because they've got smaller resources than Club Brugge. But Club Brugge sort of laying down an early marker as well. Bear in mind that one of the most experienced players of Union from last season, the goalkeeper Anthony Morris, the Luxembourg goalkeeper, he's moved on as well. So they've got a few little things to get themselves in decent nick for the start of next season.
It'll be interesting to see when because Union knocked on the door, threw the title away, then broke through the door and won the title. We'll be interesting to see if that's the high water mark of the club in its amazing story over the past half decade, or whether they can kick on. You're right to say, though, that in order to kick on, they have to deal with several clubs in Belgium with much more deeper pockets than they have, and of course, infinitely greater tradition within the Belgian game. And over in Portugal, we'll be getting on to your favourite club owner in just a second, Gerard Lopez. That noise you can hear if you listen very carefully, that's Andy beating his hooves off the ground as he comes in to talk about Gerard Lopez. First, though, let's talk about Benfica and Porto. Well, of course, because of their rivalry, they have to be busy in the transfer market every year, partially because the club's economic model depends on activity in the transfer market. But, of course, they're not laying us down. They are busy.
Yeah, they are, and they have to be. They have to fashion a response to Sporting after the last couple of seasons. Big challenge for Rui Borges, of course, who's imminently going to lose Victor Gyökeres, and he will lose Victor Gyökeres. So how Sporting spend that money will be interesting. They just about, after the departure of Amorim, managed to keep Benfica at bay and win the double last season. Bruno Lage has managed to hold on to his job despite losing the double. He improved Benfica a lot when he came in, but obviously
he'll be under a tremendous microscope, though, won't he, in the first 2 months of the season?
Of course, the trophyless Benfica season is a failure of a season. That's how it is there. Very much like a Real Madrid. So Richard Rios choosing Benfica and That's a huge thing for them. They'll hope he has a good couple of seasons there, and then they can sell him on for a lot of money. Though in this market, you never know, because he's 25 already. So be interesting to get Tim's view.
Yeah, but he's in one of those pivotal positions in modern football where if you do anything good, suddenly you're very valuable. Who knew we'd get to a stage where defensive midfielders are the thing that everyone's after?
Yeah, that's true. But I think this has the effect of the way the market has changed as well. I think it has the effect on other teams' business. So, look, we know that Porto need a big season after. It was difficult. I tend to think that André Villas-Boas, he's a little bit like the Labour government of European presidents. He's come in and whatever he's going to do, it looks terrible because of what he's inherited, really. So I think Villas-Boas has I guess like that as well. Not had the perfect not had the perfect record really. The managers he's picked so far have not gone well. He's gone through 2 already in that first season. But Francesco Farioli has come in. He's being really well back so far. Bear in mind, Gabri Veiga has been brought back from Saudi Arabia. So he's a big investment for them. They bought Borja Sainz this week from Norwich as well. Promising debut for him in the friendly this weekend. And also, they're on the brink of signing Victor Froholt, a 19-year-old from FC Copenhagen, midfielder. It's going to cost them 22 million euros. Again, it's a sizable investment for a Porto team that have been under serious FFP manners in recent years. Part of that was under the late Pinto da Costa era as well. But I think seeing them invest heavily on a guy that they do think they'll be able to sell on, and Froholt's got a lot of fans from the contribution he made over last season for Copenhagen as they won the title back. It's saying that we need to buy a player who's not just a player who's going to really excel here, but a player is young enough for us to sell for a lot of money going forward.
Which takes us to my least favourite story of the entire week, possibly of the year in Trans-Europe Express. You know my view, Andy, that one of the ways in which football clubs can be looked at is that they are the collective memory of generations of fans. That's all they are in part of the universe that I exist in. So to see Boa Vista, a club of such memory, DNA, cultural importance, laid low by activities other than losing football matches on the pitch, because that's to me, that's the measure. Of course, you can be relegated and relegated again and relegated again if you're no good. But to watch, I mean, Boa Vista, you can tell us what level they're playing at, but I know it's the 5th level in Portugal, but that is virtually semi-professional. It's just horrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's as low as it gets. It's not comparable to the National League in England.
No.
It's far lower than that. So the situation they're in is an awful one caused by a negligent owner. So they finished bottom of the top flight in Portugal. We've got to make that clear. In the season just finished. They were fighting to stay up right to the end, despite the fact they'd been barred from signing players in 5 of the previous 6 transfer windows. Again, to do with Gerard Lopez not paying the bills, to do with him not paying the electricity bill. Their electricity was cut off last season. So that again is just something that shouldn't be happening to any professional football club. They were relegated for financial reasons to the 3rd tier administratively. They didn't file their application for the league in time, so they were relegated even further. So the best possible scenario at the moment, Danny, is that they continue in the 5th tier of Portuguese football. And as we've already established, that is a very, very low level. Now, bear in mind that Lopez has already provided over Mouscron, who went out of business in Belgium, was binned from Lille before he got the opportunity to make things bad there, then went and took over Bordeaux. And say what you like about the DNCG, but something is not working about the French financial system if he's able to put one club in a very, very bad financial situation and then allowed to take over another giant of the French game. And of course, they were just about allowed to continue to compete in the 4th tier of French football this season. This man is an absolute menace in European football. And the sooner we are no longer talking about him in this section, the better.
Andy, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to tell me about 2 big games in Scandinavia.
Yes. Bodo Glimt, of course, our pals. We always talk about them. Lars Sivertsen always talks about them. He told me to keep my eye on Viking from Stavanger, the leaders of the Elite Syrian this weekend. They were at home to Bodo Glimt, and Bodo Glimt absolutely miles behind at the moment because they've been playing these European games against Spurs and the like, so they've been falling behind a little bit. This is a summer league. They did win this weekend 4-2 at Viking. They're still 7 points off the top, but they do have 3 games in hand. The other one to keep an eye out for, Mjällby, who beat AK from Stockholm 2-0 this weekend, which means they continue 4 points clear at the top, 8 points behind them now. Mjällby have never won the league, so keep an eye out for them.
Andy, you've been stupendous. Thank you very much for the last 3 hours. Thank you to all of you who've listened to some or all of our warblings for that 180 minutes. I'll be back tomorrow on H&J at about 2:30 with all the latest from Ireland. In our poll, a narrow majority of you thought that Florian Wirtz would be the summer signing to make the most impact in the Premier League this season. Coming up next here on talkSPORT, it's after the lights go out with Leon Sanderson. All I can do to end the show is to once again wish all the best to the friends and families of the great Bob Bubka and say to you, God bless you all and good night.